you miss me? I've been out of a comatose, but the
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the hobby list podcast from me, your host, Andrew Burns from Slow Burn, or I'm sorry, I'm actually from Wildfire Gaming. Um, I'm going to be finishing the audiobook that we've been doing for the last couple months, A Tale of Blood and Sweatsocks by Mick Foley. This is going to be part 7, and it's just going to cover the final two main chapters of the book. Now, the version of the book that I have does include a bonus chapter, which I don't think I'm going to fit into this episode. I will probably record one more episode at the end, just doing the bonus chapter, which will be a short episode. But for today, we're going to do the final two chapters. Then once we're finished with the book, we'll probably, move on from the audiobook realm and get back to more traditional podcasting. So if, this has been a little bit of a break for people, that's okay. We'll get back to our regularly scheduled program. But if you enjoyed the audiobook and you want to hear something similar in the future, let me know. And, maybe we can make that happen too. But for now, let's get into chapter 36 of A Tale of Blood and Sweatsocks by Mick Foley. I picked up the ringing phone on an early September morning in 1997. We had moved 3 weeks earlier to the Florida Panhandle, but our house was not quite ready to move into, and as a result, boxes were strewn everywhere in our small apartment. Hello, I sleepily answered. The voice on the other end was anything but sleepy due to the fact that the man it belonged to had probably downed a half dozen cups of coffee in the first 2 hours of the workday. Mick, this is Vince, and I want to run something by you for this Monday. We would like you to be Cactus Jack in Madison Square Garden, he told me. A big smile broke out over my face. Are you sure? I asked with my mind going back to those annual 30-second phone calls with JJ and Dylan. Vince was right there to answer my question. Mick, this is going to be huge, he said before adding. I've got to admit, pal, I never thought I'd see Cactus Jack in the World Wrestling Federation. Neither did I, Vince, I echoed. Neither did I. I arrived in Stamford, Connecticut on Sunday evening and had dinner at the home of Joey Styles, the ECW play-by-play man. We reminisced about the old days, and he even asked me if I thought Cactus Jack would ever have a shot in the World Wrestling Federation. I don't know, Joey, I lied right through my missing teeth, but I doubt it. I hated to lie to a friend, but I wanted the whole Cactus Jack return to be a mystery. When I returned to my hotel, I slept restlessly for a few hours before being awakened for my short ride to the Titan TV studios. So Chris Chambers was there to guide me through 8 hours of special effects, technical innovations, and if you don't mind my saying so, tour de force performances on the part of Dude Love, Mankind, and in a cameo, Cactus Jack, that resulted in all three characters appearing on the Titantron at once. The creative lead-in had really set the stage for the return of the hardcore legend. I was nervous as hell while the piece played because I honestly didn't know what kind of reaction Cactus Jack would get in New York City. It had been a year and a half since Cactus had existed, and 3 since he had been on national television. Wrestling fans have notoriously short memories, and I wondered if the MSG fans would even have seen my WCW exploits. My doubts were all assuaged, however, when the on-screen Mankind yelled, "Cactus Jack is back!" The response of the crowd was shocking in its sheer volume. I'd been hoping for a nice reaction, but this had surpassed anything I could have hoped for. When I emerged through the curtain, it was the loudest reaction I'd ever been a part of. My ECW send-off was more emotional and more heartfelt, but this audience was almost 20 times larger, and for that one evening, they were mine, mine, all mine. The match itself may have been my best outing of 1997, and by the time I pile drove Triple H on a table at the top of the ring, it was as if a new old star had been born reborn. I've been wondering what would have happened if I had continued from that point as Cactus Jack. It might have been huge or it might have died out. Who knows for sure? Also, a full-time Cactus Jack would have nullified the strange events of the next year that resulted in Mankind's sudden ascent in 1998. Fans often ask about that night and wonder what I was thinking on my way down the ramp. The truth is, my mind was full of mixed emotions when I heard the reaction to MSG. On one hand, I was basking in the adulation and felt like I was on top of the world. On the other hand, I was thinking about my 30-second calls with JJ effing Dillon and his assertion that I was lucky to have a job. I'd watched Mr. effing Dillon for years and always wondered how his interviews as the manager of the Four Horsemen, which were delivered with all the flash and sizzle of a UPS truck, had kept him working at all. Yes, Mr. effing Dillon, you may have been half right during our half-minute conversations. One of us was lucky to have a job. I just found out for a few months earlier about Vince's contention from years gone by that Cactus Jack doesn't look like a star. I hope that even someone as wise as Vince truly has learned a lesson about judging a book by its cover. Actually, I believe it was Vince's admission in October that he wasn't always right that allowed the World Wrestling Federation to truly excel. Brian Pillman had tragically been found dead in a Minneapolis motel room a day earlier. Vince called a meeting of all the guys to address Brian's death, but informed us that maybe time had passed him by and that some of the old formulas that had been successful for so long were simply outdated. He was a big enough man to shift responsibility to the wrestlers for much of their character development. That was really the meeting that did away with ridiculous gimmicks and ushered in a new era of realistic human beings that people could actually relate to. This was more or less the birth of the Federation's Attitude campaign. Almost immediately, old gimmicks were switched and guys became, to some extent, themselves. Gone was the stodgy rich persona of Hunter Hearst Helmsley to be replaced by a wise-ass double entendre spouting Triple H. The real Double J was taken off Titan Death Row and given new life as the Road Dogg. Rockabilly took off his bedazzler Kmart special jacket, dyed his hair to its natural state, and became badass Billy Gunn. Rocky Maivia deep-sixed his Chia Pet hairstyle and stereotyped ass-kicking persona to become The Rock. Even Howard Finkel developed a bit of tude. For some of the guys, it was too late. If Vader had come in right off the get-go as a killer, he would have drawn big money. Instead, the cowardly Vader never really found his niche. I actually had a very difficult time adjusting to the new Federation attitude, even though it would take several months for the business to pass me by. Catching back up would be one of the biggest challenges of my career. No one will ever forget the Survivor Series of November 1997. It was without a doubt the most controversial night in the history of the business, the ramifications of which are still being felt today. It was also a night in which my World Wrestling Federation career nearly ended. I still do not know all the details that set the wheels of the Survivor Series controversy in motion, so I will be somewhat brief in outlining its history. Problems seemed to arise when Bret Hart resigned from the Federation after being wooed by WCW. Bret had been and still was a huge star for Vince McMahon and had held all the company's major titles, including the World Belt, on several occasions. In the midst of the ratings war with Turner, Vince felt that the loss of Bret would be devastating to his company and so pulled strings that had previously been unheard of to keep his star. Vince was unable to match the yearly salary that WCW was offering and so, in a sense, offered Bret a lifetime contract that would offer him more over a greater length of time. Bret, it should be mentioned, had a great sense of loyalty to the Federation and took the lifetime contract. Almost immediately, problems arose, not the least of which was Shawn Michaels pulling out of WrestleMania with a knee injury. Bret saw this as a slap in the face from a man he already did not personally care for. The locker room incident had not done a whole lot to pacify the tension. It should be noted also that Bret was not at all comfortable with the new Federation attitude, which seemed to push actual wrestling to the rear in favor of storylines and liberal doses of mature content. Worse yet, with his company in certain financial straits, Vince had gone to Bret and asked to restructure his salary. Bret had balked, and at the time Vince allowed Bret to reopen negotiations with WCW, which would let him work with the Federation until December 5th. There was only one problem. Bret was still the World Wrestling Federation champion, and no one seemed quite know how to get the belt off him. Bret offered several scenarios, but there was one storyline that he was dead set against. He would not lose his title to Shawn Michaels. If Bret had gotten his way, Stone Cold or I would have had the damn belt, and none of the bizarre series of events would have unfolded. In the midst of all this, I had a problem. I had not bought my passport to Canada for the Montreal pay-per-view. I was very afraid of being detained at the Montreal airport by the Canadian police, which was a fairly common occurrence at the Canadian borders. Many wrestlers would have their bags and even their shoes cut open or destroyed by overzealous border cops trying to look like big shots. I had rented a car, which I had planned to drive from Friday's show in Detroit to Saturday's show in Toronto before driving the 400 miles to Montreal. In Detroit, Owen's buddy Ronnie Gaff offered to put me up at his home in Hamilton and drive me the rest of the loop. I knew Ronnie looked forward to these long trips for months, so I agreed to tag along. Also, the prospect of driving all night before my big matchup with Kane was a prospect that I was not looking forward to. So I headed off for a trip with the gaffer, unaware that the absence of my car would have a greater effect than I could imagine. I was very proud of my match with Kane, who was in the beginning of a huge push as an unstoppable monster. A chokeslam he had given me outside the ring had actually dented the steel ramp structure, something that mightily impressed our road technicians. I thought I had been successful in adding both to Kane's aura of a monster and my aura of never backing down. I was sore but satisfied as I settled down in front of the monitor for the main event. Bret had reached an agreement to wrestle Shawn for the good of the company, but only with the understanding that the belt would not change hands in Montreal. He walked to the ring that night with the understanding that the match would be disqualified due to interference from the Hart Foundation, which consisted of Brother Owen and brothers-in-law Davey Boy Smith and Jim Neidhart. What actually happened was far more interesting. As I've said before, people can say what they want about Shawn, and a lot of it might be true, but no one questions his in-ring abilities. With two of the top stars of this generation at their peak, the bout was shaping up as a match of the year contender. The Montreal fans were solidly behind Bret, who was something of a national hero in his native country. Then in a moment, everything seemed to fall apart. The match had, for the most part, been a one-sided affair, as Shawn was receiving punishment from the Hitman both in and out of the ring. Sean had momentarily stopped Brett and placed him in the hitman's own sharpshooter submission. This was interesting, but not all that strange until I saw referee Earl Hebner calling for the bell. The bell rang, and Hebner quickly sprinted from the ring and into a waiting automobile that whisked him away from the arena. Brett and Sean both seemed dumbfounded. Sean was handed the belt and was ordered by Vince McMahon to get the hell out of here. Brett later labeled Sean as a co-conspirator in the title change, but if true, he did a good job of hiding it as he reached the backstage area. "There is no way I'm accepting this fucking belt like this," the Heartbreak Kid yelled. "This is bullshit." Back in the ring, Brett started to sense that he'd been swerved out of his title. Confusion turned to anger when that realization sunk in and the hitman spotted Vince at ringside. Not knowing what else to do, he launched a wad of spit that hit Vince high on the right side of his face. The crowd was still in a state of disbelief when the Hart Foundation joined Brett in the ring and gave support to the man who had given 14 years of his career to the World Wrestling Federation, only to have the organization screw him over. The backstage area was also in a state of disbelief. Actually, a state of shock might be a more accurate description. I was really upset by what I had just seen. "You don't do that to a guy like Bret Hart," is all I could say for minutes as I repeated it over and over. I began to get angrier as time went by. "How could they expect me to work here after this?" I said to Pat Patterson, who was visibly upset by what had just transpired. I know," said Pat with tears welling up in his eyes. "I can't believe it myself." I wasn't mad at Pat, but gave him a message to give to my boss, who at that specific time I detested. "Tell Vince that I'm not coming to work tomorrow." Several other wrestlers also echoed my sentiments about not wanting to work for the company. I saw Vince Russo, our head writer, who looked greatly stressed. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," I said to Russo, without knowing that he'd been innocent of the deception. Russo later told me that those words hurt him worse than anything he'd ever experienced. I stormed out of the arena with Ronnie Gaff in tow. We got in the car, and I was not shy about letting my feelings be known. "I'm not working for this damn company anymore," I spat out emotionally. Ronnie, for his part, was devastated, not only because he'd seen his hero's brother get screwed, but because he could sense his long-anticipated wrestling road trip vacation falling apart. "Cactus, please," he begged me, "think about what you were saying." "I have thought about it, Ronnie," I shot back, "and I'm not going to work." When I got to my hotel, I placed a series of phone calls. I called Jim Ross first and left a message that said, "Tell Vince I'm not coming to work. I'm sick to my stomach and I don't feel like I can work here anymore. If you have any questions, you can call me at the Quality Inn." Next, I dialed Brett, who was staying in another hotel. He wasn't in, but I left a message repeating sentiments I'd explained to Ross, giving him our support. I then tried Owen's room and was relieved to find him in. "What happened?" I asked. "Well," Owen said matter-of-factly, "Vince walked into Brett's dressing room while Brett was getting changed. He apologized to Brett, but Brett told him, 'Vince, I'm going to take a shower. If you are still here when I get out, I'm going to punch you right in the fucking mouth.'" "Well, did Vince leave?" I asked. "No," Owen replied. "He stayed there the whole time Brett was in the shower." "Well, what happened when he got out?" I wanted to know. "Brett walked up and punched Vince right in the mouth," he calmly told me. "Vince went down and Shane, Vince's son, tried to help him get his wits, and then they left." I wanted Owen to know that his family had my support. "Oh, and I'm not going to the show tomorrow, and a whole lot of other guys aren't either. Vince is going to have to at least apologize tomorrow, or else he won't have much of a company." By this time, Kane had walked in, we were splitting a room, and had heard much of what was said. He was also upset, but as a 7-year veteran who had finally found a bankable gimmick, he was not in a position to walk out. I assured him that I understood his position completely before noticing that my message light was on, but I called the operator and was told that Jim Ross had returned my call. I talked to JR for quite a while, and while not condoning what had just happened, he did try to explain the extenuating circumstances that surrounded it. "Mick, you've got to understand that Vince only did what he thinks is necessary for this company's survival," Ross told me. I listened to everything he said, and a lot of it made sense, but nonetheless, my mind was made up. "Tell Vince that I'm not showing up," was how I finished the conversation. Next, I had the dubious distinction of informing my wife for the second time in a little over 3 years that I was walking out on a six-figure salary. By this point, my figure was almost double my WCW income, which made my distinction about twice as dubious. I told Colette of my plans, and she seemed bewildered. "Are you sure, Mick? Things were going so well," she said. "It doesn't matter, Colette," I said. "I can't work for people who would do this type of thing." She was sensitive to how I felt, but realistic as well. "Mick, what will we do for money?" she rightfully wanted to know. "We don't have to do anything," I assured her. "We have enough money to live on for a long, long time. I can be at home and actually get to spend time with the kids, and I guarantee you when my contract expires in 4 years, there will still be a place in the business for a guy like me." Colette was sad, but she knew that my mind was made up and that I believed in my cause. "Well, I guess I'm behind you then," she said before saying our goodbyes for the evening. When I hung up, I noticed that the message light was on again. I called for the operator and asked for my messages. "Mr. Foley and Mr. McMahon called and wants you to call him back." "Oh, God," I said to Kane. "Vince called. I'm sorry, but I just don't think I can handle talking to him right now." I lay awake for a long time that night thinking about the events of the evening. I couldn't help but think that Vince, who had just been punched in the face, had thought enough of Mick Foley to call him when he heard of my decision. At this point, I was cursing myself for having ridden with Ronnie. Without him, I would have caught the last flight out of Montreal to anywhere and been gone. Because of him, my rental car was in a garage that I couldn't find, and I was completely dependent on him to bring me back to my car in Hamilton. Ronnie was intent on traveling to the next two shows, even though, from a Hart family perspective, a tour was over. So while the rest of the crew left for television in Ottawa, I stayed behind in my hotel in Montreal. I didn't have much to do that day but think, and so I thought a lot. I still couldn't quite believe what had happened the night before, but hoped that somehow things would work out. When Vince saw his depleted crew, he would be forced to fix things, and then I would be happy to rejoin the Federation. I began thinking about my decision to leave and realized that quitting the company amounted to a breach of my contract and that I would forfeit any monies that were due to me. I didn't mind sitting out for a year, but I sure didn't want to lose money that I had already worked for. If I left with no notice, I would be out 3 months of pay-per-views, 6 months of royalties, and 1 month of arena shows. That gave me cause to think about giving a 3 months notice, so at least I could get back what was rightfully mine. Still, an apology or a rectification of the situation by Vince would make things a whole lot easier for me. I watched Raw with great anticipation that night, but was devastated to see that instead of admitting their mistake, the World Wrestling Federation was actually playing it up. They were mocking Brett, and I was disgusted. One by one, I saw wrestlers appear on the screen who told me only one night earlier that they wouldn't be working anymore. I realized that I had absolutely no pull. It was the difference between robbing a score with a real gun and robbing a store with a water pistol. My show of rebellion just wasn't going to work. Surprisingly, the telecast had nothing but positive comments about Mankind. Later that night, I received a call from Jim Cornette, and we talked for close to 2 hours. He made me see that even if none of us approved of what Vince had done, we had to understand that he did what he felt was best for the company. WCW was hell-bent on destroying Vince by any means necessary, and when it came to Vince McMahon, Ted Turner did indeed have very deep pockets. I'd seen the World Wrestling Federation Women's Champion show up on Nitro with her belt and throw it in the garbage. It wouldn't be beneath the WCW to offer Brett a couple of hundred extra grand to do it as well. The Federation had always been able to make its world title mean something. Without it, the company would be in a gigantic hole. Finally, my decision came down to money. I respected Brett and I liked him a great deal personally, but I had to feel that he was going to be all right. He would have about $2 million a year to fall back on while I would have nothing. I just kept thinking of those figures, $2 million to zero, zero to $2 million. With great reservation, I showed up at TV tapings the following afternoon. I was welcomed back with open arms, and my walkout was never brought up again. As a matter of fact, I received an unusually large payoff for Ottawa, larger still when you remember that I wasn't even there. Apparently, Brett had really appreciated the gesture of respect that I had made and made mention of it in several interviews I read. WCW had a gold mine waiting in Brett, but not surprisingly, failed to take advantage of it. Within months, due to office politics and creative differences, Brett was just another one of the guys. They literally wasted one of the greatest performers in the business. The Federation, on the other hand, used the strange event as a catalyst for greater ideas and ratings. The real-life screwing of Bret Hart was used as a springboard for Vince McMahon's evil Mr. McMahon persona, a persona that helped propel the company to greater success than was once thought possible. The renegade Stone Cold Steve Austin persona now had the perfect foil to play off in the corporate scumbag Mr. McMahon, and house show attendance took off immediately. Personally, I felt as if my career was at a crossroads. I knew that Vince was a big fan of both Mankind and the Dude, but I felt personally that Cactus Jack could draw the most interest and money. With the return of Cactus Jack in mind, I proposed a somewhat bizarre series of matches with my old friend and nemesis Terry Funk, which would culminate in a coup de grace of barbarity at WrestleMania. I've been talking with Victor Quinones of my IWA Japan Pass, and he asked if I thought death matches would ever go over in the States. Now, it's just my personal opinion, but I find bloodletting and savagery between two friends to be less offensive than heavy sexual content, at least when it's done well. I would never propose putting this type of match on Raw, but if it were on pay-per-view with a disclaimer, then I wouldn't see anything wrong with it. I came up with the idea of the best-of-7 deathmatch tournament. Magnum TA and Nikita Koloff had enjoyed incredible success with this concept in the mid-'80s featuring regular matches, and I figured the addled allure of danger would complement their concept nicely. I imagined a press conference where Terry and I would pull these ridiculous matches out of a fishbowl. "Mr. Funk has just chosen a bed of nails match," the announcer would say. After 6 matches were picked, the fans would be allowed to choose the stipulations for the final showdown. Now, I'll admit, I was going to tamper with the votes just a bit so that the finale would be a rematch of our Kawasaki Stadium Classic. A no-rope, barbed wire board C4 explosive exploding ring death match. I pictured it airing on WrestleMania via satellite live from Terry's Double Cross Ranch near Amarillo, Texas. I thought I had a winner on my hands, and I wanted badly to propose it, but first I had to make sure that I had an opponent to propose. I gave the Funker a call. Less than a year earlier, Terry had been brought in for a couple of shows, and the Federation had vowed never to use him again. He had on the air called an announcer a Yankee bastard, and had referred to Vince as a goddamn son of a bitch. The company had been somewhat less than thrilled with him, but hell, looking back, Terry's verbal rampage had been a precursor of sorts for the current Raw show. The words he had been reprimanded for were pretty common utterances for the new West Federation attitude, and I thought that maybe they'd give the goddamn Texas bastard another try. I called Terry up and ran my idea by him. His answer was simple: Cactus, I would love to work with you again. Now came the hard part, pitching the idea to Vince. I requested a meeting with him, and we met along with Bruce Pritchard and Jim Ross after television tapings in a dressing room in Columbus, Ohio. I tried to stress the human drama aspect over the blood and guts, although I freely admitted there would be plenty of that also. I also wanted him to know that the quality of the matches would be what counted, and I personally gave him my guarantee that they would be top notch. I proposed that the series of matches would cover the January, February, and March pay per views, with March being the WrestleMania blowout. The other four tournament matches could take place either or after television tapings with cameras still rolling, so that the highlights of the ring atrocities could be aired. I also speculated that a home video of the deathmatch tournament would bring in big money. Vince seemed intrigued, especially with the notion of a ring exploding at Terry's ranch. We might possibly be able to do this, the evil McMahon stated. A few days later, Jim Cornette called me up. Cactus Vince loves the idea, but we're going to change it up a little bit, Corny told me. We want you and Terry to start off as a team at the Royal Rumble in January. Somehow you have a falling out, and Terry challenges you to a Texas death match right here there in Houston for the February pay-per-view. Then you'll have the damnedest fight they've ever seen at WrestleMania. That sounded great, but there was one problem. Vince was planning a huge surprise, which would turn out to be Mike Tyson, and he was expecting a lot of mainstream media to be covering the event. He didn't think that having two human beings blow each other up would be the best way to expose our product to this new audience. In retrospect, he was probably right. They still wanted the Funker, but they wanted him as my tag team partner. Hell, that didn't sound too bad. After all, Terry and I had probably done enough damage to each other. Maybe it was time that we were on the same side for a while. Now all we had to do was come up with a way to introduce Terry to an audience that unfortunately hadn't been privy to the Funker's exploits over the last 30 years. We put the ball in motion by having Dude Love wrestle Billy Gunn, while his teammate the Road Dogg did humorous commentary. The dude pulled out the match, squeaked out a victory, but was jumped from behind by the dog. We fought up the ramp to the top where a referee tried to break up the melee. Gunn grabbed me and sent me sailing off the 7.5-foot stage. I once heard the stage referred to as being 15 feet high, but that would make me about 13 feet and 10 inches tall. Still, the distance seemed large as I hurtled earthward toward the table that I knew would break my fall. Oops. I missed the table, grazed it to be accurate, and one of its legs bent as I sailed past it and crashed in a heap on the cold, hard Durham, New Hampshire concrete. Gunn and Dog, collectively known as the New Age Outlaws, reacted with great remorse to my injury. Together they climbed down the stage and rushed to my aid. As soon as they saw that I was helpless, they immediately began putting the boots to me in one of the funnier examples of poor sportsmanship that I have ever seen. It didn't seem funny at the time, however, as the fall had legitimately shaken me up and would bother me for several weeks. A holiday season pilgrimage to Santa's village seemed to revitalize me the next day, so I was allowed to walk around the snow-covered Christmas wonderland at my leisure. My wife thought I was crazy when I wrote to the owners of my desire to walk around an empty kids' park and even joked that my photo would be on the wall as if in a post office mugshot. Instead, the owners were delighted to hear of my fondness, obsession with their little park. There's just something about that place, I guess, that makes me feel like a kid. To me, there's just nothing like being on a Ferris wheel with my daughter, with the sun setting on a beautiful summer's day, with a gorgeous view of the White Mountains surrounding me, even if in the back of my mind I'm thinking of busting someone open with a steel chair. I went home for the holidays and enjoyed the feeling of 16 hours of Christmas music bombarding my senses. Unfortunately, I think I overloaded on Christmas spirit by force-feeding carols and Christmas videos to my kids. What do you mean you don't want to watch Frosty? I actually yelled at my kids. Don't you have any respect for Christmas? Adding to my Yuletide woes was the fact that I'd been staying awake for hours every night transferring our camcorder family memories onto standard VHS videos. By the time Christmas morning rolled around, I was shot. I tried to be at my Christmas best, but a parade of stinky gifts that Colette had bought me had me about ready to snap. Finally, I opened the gift that broke the camel's back. I opened up Colette's expertly wrapped box to find, of all things, a Tommy Hilfiger t-shirt that was red, white, and blue with a big bold Tommy on the front. You think that I would know better, having seen my mother pretend to like gifts that I knew she'd never use. I remember hearing my dad swear up and down that he loved the flowered button-down shirt I'd gotten him when I was 9, only to discover it in his drawer, still in the wrapper 10 years later. Proper gift etiquette eluded me, however, as I searched for the words to describe how I felt. I hate this thing, Colette. Probably wasn't the right choice, but it's the one I made. Minutes later, I stumbled into my room for a long winter's nap before returning to apologize to all. The next day, I headed for the Nassau Coliseum to introduce the world to the Funker. I went to the TV studio early in the morning to shoot another unique introduction with Chris Chambers, which would feature the dude morphing into Cactus Jack. It was there that I learned that Terry Funk wouldn't be my partner, but that Chainsaw Charlie would. For reasons that I still don't quite understand, Terry was, at his own request, turned into Chainsaw Charlie, and the result wasn't quite what I was looking for. Cactus Jack stuck around for 3 months this time, but in truth, his impact was not all that great. It might have been a lack of interview time, or it might have been the somewhat anticlimactic debut of Terry chainsawing his way out of a wooden box with a pair of baby powder pantyhose on his head, but for some reason our team didn't quite take off as we'd planned. Don't get me wrong, the team wasn't a failure, but it did fail to live up to what I thought it could be. I thought we could usher in a new era of danger and dynamic promos into the world of sports entertainment. Instead, we were just a couple of popular wrestlers who were miles apart from Steve Austin on the food chain. At one particular six-man tag in Louisville, Kentucky, my value became very clear to me. Originally, Terry was contracted to do all 5 shows with the Federation. When he became my partner, he went on the road full time. As a concession to the fact that he was 54 years old and still working as hard in the ring as ever, the office would occasionally give Terry a few days off. As a result, on this night, I was teamed with Owen Hart and Stone Cold against the Outlaws and The Rock. The crowd was chanting the familiar Rocky sucks, when Road Dogg got on the mic to disagree. No, he doesn't, said the dog. His timing's good. He looks great, plus he's a pretty good guy. The match started, and Owen and I got nice responses to our respective moves. Then I tagged in Austin, and the place went crazy. "Did you ever get the feeling that he's the main course and we're just a couple of side dishes?" Owen jokingly asked me. Austin threw some punches, and the crowd went wild. "Kind of like a baked potato," I said to Owen. Austin flipped off gun, and the roar got even louder. "Jack, let's face it. You're like a three-bean salad that no one even wants," Owen countered. Austin hit the Luthez press, a move so silly it could actually be called the dick to the mouth, and the Louisville Gardens erupted. "Owen, let's face it. You and I are just little sprigs of parsley that will just be thrown out after dinner," I only half-jokingly answered back. "Yeah, you're right," Owen agreed. "That's exactly what we are." As I've mentioned, Steve Austin is a great guy, but I'd be lying if I said that the attention he was receiving in comparison to me didn't hurt me just a little bit, sometimes more than a little. The Austin phenomenon notwithstanding, Terry and I did have several great moments together. Our Royal Rumble appearance, where Terry and I willingly traded headshots before teaming up to kick The Rock's Rudy Poo candy ass, was a definite highlight. I actually appeared as all 3 faces of Foley in the contest, but I will always best remember the Rumble for the reaction of Terry when he realized I had him dead to rights with a steel chair. He rolled up his pantyhose so I could clearly see his face, nodded his head up and down to give me the okay, and waited like a man for the chair shot that nearly leveled him. Terry recoiled from the blow by staggering around and throwing 2 or 3 Fred Stanford jabs into the air. I presented Terry the same chair, which he accepted as if he were a cherished family heirloom. I then gave Funk the go-ahead, and he clobbered me 3 times. It was a truly warm moment between friends. We also had a famous ride in a dumpster, courtesy of the Outlaws. I had a match with Terry just for the hell of it, which culminated in my flying elbow onto the fallen Funker from the side of the Titantron onto a dumpster. With both of us incapacitated, the Outlaws shut the lid and wheeled us off the ramp, leading to a crash landing on the cold, hard concrete below. It should have, could have, and would have been a truly great image, but the details were all wrong. For one thing, my dive off the Titantron should have been a highlight to match the later Hell in a Cell fall for sheer drama. I told Vince that I would climb only about 8 feet up the massive screen, but I had every intention of going up about 15 when we were live. During the course of our brawl, the dumpster had rolled too close, and when I started climbing, I realized that a higher fall would send me way past the outer limit of the dumpster. Rather than get down and roll it to the proper distance, I just took off, which would have been impressive enough if not for the cloud of packing peanuts that poofed up in the air upon impact. When we were helped out of the dumpster, there were peanuts everywhere. I swear the china I had shipped for Christmas from England didn't look as snugly as we had when we were helped out of the trash bin. Finally, we probably over-exaggerated our condition, which didn't help our credibility when we came running down the aisle to end the show. Within an hour and a half, we went from being unconscious in an ambulance to hitting the bad guys with our IV stands. Terry was even wearing a hospital gown, although mercifully, his wrinkled ass never made the air. Also, we did have a tremendous dumpster match with the Outlaws at Mania, which saw us capture the belts and helped us set the stage for the next part of my career. With the help of a forklift, we were able to dump both Gun and Dog into a backstage dumpster for the Tag Team Championship. How were we to know that we would be the victims of the little-known wrong dumpster rule, which would lead to the stripping of the title belts in a rematch inside a steel cage the next evening on Raw? Unfortunately, Terry had suffered a bad injury in his lower back when, at 54 years of age, he was powerbombed off the ring apron into the dumpster below. Within minutes of the fall, his back was visibly bruised and within hours had filled with liquid. He somehow was able to get through the next night at Raw, but it would be the last time that Funk and Cactus would team. I don't mean to demean what Terry and I did, because in truth we had some excellent matches. With all wrestling considerations aside, I will always fondly remember my 3-month union with Chainsaw, for it gave me the chance to ride the road with my hero and mentor to get inside his middle-aged and crazy mind. Terry Funk is simply everything that is right about this business. I think my fellow Florida Panhandle neighbor, the road dog Jesse James, put it best when Terry walked past one day and he said, I don't care what the announcers tell everybody. That's the real toughest son of a bitch in the World Wrestling Federation. I don't know if people can fully appreciate how difficult it is to continually get up for big matches. I know the general public just sees this as silly spectacle filled with make believe fighting, but I doubt that even real fans know what it's like to try to get up for big matches again and again, even when the mind and body are exhausted. We were all battered and bruised after WrestleMania, with Funk needing hospitalization, but somehow we all needed to suck it up one more time for the cage match that would change my fortunes. I had received a surprise phone call from Vince Russo about a week earlier that had changed my outlook on the business. Until the phone call, I was looking at a post WrestleMania program with Mark Marrow, who by this point was marvelous Mark Marrow, and was having big problems with his valet/wife Rena, aka Sable. Of course, the problems with his wife were fictional, but the new marvelous image had given fans a whole new persona. Since recovering from knee injury, Marrow had altered his wrestling style, abandoning high flying for a more conservative ground game. I actually came up with a good idea for me and Marrow that I thought would be entertaining, and I had a little bit of hope for the match. Russo's phone call changed all that. Vince, how are you? I said into the phone as I walked around the small gym that Colette and I had just opened. Cactus, I got some good news for you, said Russo with a voice that was pure Brooklyn, even though he'd grown up only 5 miles from me in the middle of Long Island. What is it? I said with great anticipation running through my mind. You didn't reconsider that Miro thing, did you? It's better than that, Russo quickly replied. We want you to wrestle Austin at the next pay-per-view. I loved it, but I knew better than to get excited. Are you sure it's okay with Steve? I asked. Russo quickly relieved my fears. Are you kidding? He said. It was Steve's idea. I knew that a program with Steve could be a big success, but as Michael Hayes had reminded me years earlier, I would need a reason. The night after WrestleMania gave it to me. Terry and I had a short but brutal fight with the Outlaws and a host of others inside the cage. He could hardly move due to the dumpster bomb. I guess because of that, Terry was handcuffed to the cage as the Outlaws worked me over. Showing the intestinal fortitude that was my trademark, I battled back against the odds and was climbing the cage en route to victory. When I got there and hung my body over the cage, the returning X-Pac, who had just jumped ship from WCW, was there to meet me with a chair over the head that sent me back inside. I was beaten up some before being pile-driven onto the same chair for the crushing defeat. In this cage match, a pinfall could also signal victory. With the match over, X-Pac entered the ring to assume the assault and was joined by Triple H and Chyna. This was the birth of the new D-Generation X, or DX, and a pretty good birth it was. They took turns beating on me, with X-Pac giving me the Bronco ride in the corner, Hunter giving me a pedigree on the chair, and the Outlaws giving me a couple of extra chair shots for good measure. The combination of X-Pac's balls bouncing up and down in my face and the repetitive feeling of steel against my skull had me feeling both pissed off and pained as I lay on the canvas. DX left the ring and several fans started to leave, thinking the show was over. In an attempt to keep them in their seats, Howard Finkel's voice cut through the Albany, New York air. Ladies and gentlemen, remember, coming up soon will be Stone Cold Steve Austin. The place went wild and started chanting his name. Austin, 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 came the noise as I slowly got to my feet. I looked at Terry and the very real pain that was etched on his face. I thought of myself and the years of painful mornings I'd had to endure. Two of the hardest working SOBs in the history of the business, and all we were to Albany were sprigs of parsley on a plate. Well, I may have been a sprig, but I was a sprig with feelings and had just been hurt. That was definitely a negative. There was also a positive. I had a reason, and it was a good one. The next night in Syracuse, New York, I walked out to the ring with a neck brace and a heavy heart. I spoke to the fans and made my feelings clear. I've always taken a lot of chances in the ring, and some very bad things have happened to me over the years. What I've always had is the comfort of knowing that when I looked at my career, my dreams, the things I'd accomplished, and the things I'd set my heart on, that it was always worth the pain. So people ask Cactus, how's your neck? I'd say that I'll be damned if I'm going to let a group of scum like DX put Cactus Jack away. Oh, I guess you see that Terry Funk's not here, and I haven't talked to Terry, but I left a message on his answering machine, and I'm not saying this to sound tough, but Cactus Jack and Terry Funk do not miss wrestling matches. So I have to guess if the Funker was hurt enough to fly home, then it's probably pretty bad. I really wish that people could know Terry a little bit more than just what they see in the ring, because people will always debate on who the greatest wrestler of all time is, but I guarantee you, you ask every damn last bunch of people in the dressing room, they'll say that Terry Funk is the gutsiest old bastard they've ever seen in their lives. Now, I guess you've probably seen Terry's back, and I hope you saw WrestleMania because it was a tremendous match, and I'm very proud of it. And Terry was lying there on his bed with his belt, and he said, Cactus, it's all been worth it, but we don't have those belts now, do we? And I'm not going to get into the reason why, but I will say that when Cactus Jack was lying there and I was unconscious and I could barely move, it was very hard to move, and I was not very far from being unconscious. And when I looked at Terry Funk, I heard something in my ears, and to tell you the truth, it kind of made me sick. That's There was an announcement being made thanking the fans for coming to the World Wrestling Federation, and they said something about Stone Cold Steve Austin, and people started chanting his name. And it's funny because when I came here 2 years ago, I was Mankind, and there were always people saying, "Why don't you just be Cactus Jack?" Then I came out in tie dye and some white boots, and they said, "Why don't you just be Cactus Jack?" Well, I gave you Cactus Jack. I gave you every goddamn bit of energy I had, and when I was lying there helpless, you chanted someone else's name. This is not a knock on Stone Cold Steve Austin. Hey, I'm happy he's the champion, and he may not admit it, but we've known each other a long time, and he's been my friend. But what you did to me and Terry Funk laying there in the middle of the ring was not only distasteful and disrespectful, it was disgusting. Well, I can finally say for the first time after 13 years of blood, sweat, and tears that it's not worth it anymore. It's going to be a long time before you see Cactus Jack in the ring again. The next week's Raw was remarkable for two reasons. It ended WCW's year and a half run on top of the ratings, and it ushered in the return of Dude Love. Actually, the show was classic Federation storytelling, with Austin challenging Vince to a match and Vince training for the big showdown throughout the 2 hour show. The program was both captivating and entertaining and was a good example of why Raw is the hottest television show in the country. One of my favorite segments was when Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe, known collectively as the Stooges, were giving Vince wrestling pointers in the dressing room. Now, Vince, you know that Austin always sets up the summer with a boot to the stomach, advised Briscoe, a former collegiate and professional star wrestling from Oklahoma. When he does that, you hook him here, under the knee. Once you do that, Vince, you own him. You own him. Vince nodded his head knowingly while Patterson chimed in, "Boy, is he in for a surprise." Patterson and Briscoe are a shining example of the difference between the Federation and WCW. WCW was not able to make Bret Hart a star, a guy who had already been one for over a dozen years. Vince, on the other hand, was able to take two out of shape retired wrestlers and make them bigger names than they had been in their heyday. Vince's son Shane, who is now a top performer with the company, once asked me what I would like to do when I was finished wrestling. "I would like to be one of the Stooges," I said. "I don't know," Shane retorted. "The Stooges get beat up a lot." "Shane," I shot back, "I'm good at that." The show was primed for a crescendo until Dude's music played and the tie-dyed hippie throwback had proceeded to ruin the festivities. "The Dude wants to know, can't we all just get along? I got to level with you, Philadelphia. The Dude does not feel a whole lot of love out here tonight. But Steve-O, as you know, there's only one cat who can bring peace to the war zone, and that's Dude Love. Now, Stone Cold, I know you got your heart set on putting some heavy duty booty to Uncle Vinny, but the Dude has got to put the veto on this one. Oh, we are tight, Steve-O. About as tight as two cats can be. But you got to understand, Steve-O. Vince McMahon writes the checks that let the Dude live the kind of life that the Dude likes to live. So I guess you could say, Uncle Vinny, you are my main man. And I want you to remember one thing and remember it good. When you look at Stone Cold Steve Austin, you got your eyes set on the world's toughest SOB, and he can put you down on your ASS just like..." A furious Vince shoved Dude on his ample butt, and Dude started to stalk the pumped-up owner of the company. Somehow, in all of this, Dude turned on a frustrated Austin, and the show went off the air with Austin feeling the loved one's wrath. The numbers on the show were phenomenal, even if the Dude's performance did serve to piss off the same people we were just entertaining so well. The next week, WCW countered by premiering Hollywood Hogan vs. Bill Goldberg, and once again pulled ahead in the ratings. By doing so, WCW had actually shot itself in the foot. Hogan and Goldberg would have been a surefire pay-per-view main event. By throwing the match away for free, WCW had actually lost millions in potential revenue. For the next several months, the ratings would teeter back and forth. For the next few weeks, a conspiracy theory played out, and it was obvious that the Dude was in McMahon's pocket. Dude was even given his own Love Shack interview segment, which featured a pink shag rug, love beads, lava lamps, and new dudettes. The dudettes seemed to be a different breed now. Gone was the innocence of old, replaced by the skimpiest of thong bikinis. Under those guidelines, my wife graciously declined the company's invitation to resume her role from the previous summer. The pay-per-view match was a tremendous success, both artistically and financially. I actually had a great deal of doubt leading up to this match, as I wasn't quite sure how to keep the Dude in character while at the same time making him seem like a threat to the Federation champion. I even dyed my hair a little to try to alter the Dude's persona. I later found out that even the office had reservations about the matchup. As it turned out, all our fears were quickly relieved, and Austin and I tore the house down. Vince was simply hilarious in his role as the crooked boss who was looking for any opportunity to screw the rattlesnake out of the gold. His facial expressions, with the exception of the bobbing Adam's apple during time of fear, are the best in the business. At the end of the match, Dude was down and out as the concerned McMahon tried in vain to lift his 300 pounds off the ground. Austin wielded a chair which was supposedly meant for Dude, but strayed by about 2 feet and caught the evil Vince square in the head. Vince went down to the delight of the fans, but the bell was rung immediately, signaling the disqualification of the champion. Dude had won! Dude had won! In the words of Owen Hart, I did it! Yes! I am a winner! Woo! Unfortunately, the belt cannot change hands without a DQ, so Austin retained the champ. Hardcore is a word that's thrown around often, but its definition is kind of vague. I hope you know by now that I use the term hardcore legend as a joke simply because I like the way it sounds, and because I get a kick out of referring to myself as a legend. A legend is an honor that others can bestow upon me if they so desire. If they mean it, I'm flattered, but the continual hardcore legend reference is something I do to amuse myself. No less an authority than Terry Funk described who he believed to be truly hardcore. Vince McMahon is hardcore. You know why, Cactus? Asked the grizzled funker. Because he's a millionaire who doesn't need to be getting hit in the head with chairs, but he does it anyway because he loves it. So as the ECW fans might say, he's hardcore. He's hardcore. The next two Raws were big ones as WCW was preempted for 2 weeks for the NBA playoffs. This we felt would be a chance to expose our superior product to the fans who were getting fed up with the staleness of Turner's product. The first week witnessed Vince getting a title shot to Goldust, a fact that did not sit well with the Dude. Dude came out of character, lamenting the fact that he had worn the tie-dye like Vince wanted, had beaten Austin like Vince wanted, and now he was giving my shot to a freak with a buster like Goldust. This set the stage for the next week's show in Richmond, Virginia. The show in Richmond may have been one of my finest hours. I came out on stage to start the show and immediately apologized for all my corporate misdeeds of the preceding few weeks. Before I left, I vowed that there were 3 things that I would never do again. Suck up to a lowlife like Vince McMahon, have my children watch their dad bump and grind with a couple of second-rate strippers, and above all else, I will never, ever let you make me wear this tie-dyed crap again. The crowd roared its approval at Mick Foley's new attitude until Vince came down and cut one of his all-time best promos. Even though I just vowed my independence, it seemed that I couldn't quite shake Vince's hold over me as I stood mesmerized by Vince's tales of loyalty and sacrifice. You want a title shot, Mick? He yelled into my nodding face. Then you go out and earn it. Tonight you're going to have a match with Terry Funk, and I don't want you to just beat him. I want you to destroy him. I want you to tear his heart out so that the blood drips down your arm. Then you'll get your title shot. I was completely under Vince's spell until the sound of glass breaking and the roar of 18,000 fans signaled the arrival of Stone Cold, who proceeded to tear down the Love Shack. It was like a strange battle for Mick Foley's soul, with Vince as the devil and Austin as something of a beer-swilling, foul-mouthed angel. Who would win out in this modern-day morality tale? We would soon find out. Chapter 37. Terry and I had a classic no-holds-barred contest. Before the match, we spoke very little, but we both had the clear understanding that this was a very important match. Cactus, let's go out there and give it to him, I remember Terry saying before leaving me alone for the next hour to prepare for the contest. Many who saw it considered my match with Terry to be the best Raw match of the year. I felt that it was on par with my match with Austin, if not slightly better. For the record, it was the only match I've ever wrestled as Mick Foley. These days, it seems that hardcore matches have become an excuse to go all over the building and hit each other with cool stuff. That may be entertaining, and I'm not saying it's not painful, but in my mind, it takes away from what these things should really be about. Intensity. Terry and I wrestled with intensity that night. Lots of it. I came out the winner and then challenged Austin, who'd been doing color commentary, to step into the ring. He threw his ever-present beer in my face, and the temporary loss of vision caused me to mistakenly clamp the mandible claw onto corporate stooge Pat Patterson. As my vision cleared, I saw Austin flipping me off, but rolled out of the ring to avoid further incident. Suddenly, Vince appeared with the 2 second-rate strippers and my tie-dyed dude outfit in his arms. As my music kicked in, I walked up the ramp, and to the strains of do love, baby, I proceeded to do everything I swore I never would. I sucked up to Vince by giving him a big sloppy hug. I not only took back the dude outfit, but cradled the tie-dyed ensemble with the tenderness usually reserved for old scratchy Leonard Cohen albums. And yes, the dude certainly did bump and grind with the strippers for my children and the whole world to see. Not only that, but I did it with a hell of a lot of gusto for a guy who had just been through a war and had a head wound that would require 27 stitches to close. Vince even joined in a classic Raw moment. The 4 of us gleefully boogied our way off the air as Austin shook his head with disgust. Stone Cold had lost out, and the wicked Vince had my soul. Afterward, I did what I always do after suffering an injury. I looked for a camera. Vince, let's do an interview, I yelled, and we prepared to capture this touching moment on film. The dudettes were nice enough to return to their state of near undress, and the cameras rolled. Hey, Vince, you want a little bit of this action? I laughed in my dude way as I pointed to my 2 love chicks. Oh, dude, I'm a married man, Vince laughed with all the conviction of a sleazy used car salesman. Besides, I think you're going to need all the love you can get. Looks like you've got a little scratch up there. He continued as the camera zoomed in on a 3-inch goalie high on the left side of my skull. We'll probably need a little band-aid to patch that up. The show did a phenomenal 5.4 rating in the Nielsen's. As I'd hoped, many of the new viewers stayed tuned to our show, and we started to defeat our southern adversaries with greater and greater frequency. A year later, our show set an all-time record with an 8.1 rating, up a full 50% in a year. The basketball game on TNT, stocked with spoiled multimillionaires, did a 1.3. In the remaining 3 weeks leading up to the May Over the Edge pay-per-view, I decided to tweak Dude's image. If Dude was going to be Vince's hand-picked corporate champion, then I felt I needed to look like it. In a move that was very reminiscent of the psychology behind the ECW Hardcore Christmas, I once again strove to eliminate anything that the fans had found admirable about me. The hair was slicked back into a neat ponytail, and I borrowed one of Vince's dapper sports jackets and a tie. I probably should have cut the hair and shaved, but I did come forth with a quality prop, a dental flipper of my 2 front teeth. I hadn't worn these false teeth in so many years that I had difficulty speaking with them, but when I did, it was pure heat. Front teeth? Now that's selling out. Sporting a pair of eyeglasses that were slightly dripping down my amputated auditory appendage and clutching a folding copy of the Wall Street Journal, the new corporate kiss-ass Dude made his debut in Baltimore. Sounding like a dull college professor or Dean Douglas, the Dude addressed the crowd. It seems that of late I have been having trouble with my identity, but now with the gracious help of Vince McMahon I have found out who I am. I am a speaker of 4 languages. I am a student of American history and a reader of Greek tragedy. I am a leader of men and a lover of women, as well as the toughest SOB in the World Wrestling Federation. And I'm Dude Love, your next World Wrestling Federation champion. Vince beamed with pride as he announced the special guest for the coming pay-per-view. First, Pat Patterson was announced as a special guest ring announcer. Next, the esteemed Gerald Briscoe was brought out as the special guest timekeeper. Finally, Vince gave a huge build-up for the guest referee, ending with, "Here he comes right now." To Vince's embarrassment, there was no referee forthcoming. The crowd started to laugh. Vince tried once again with a second, "Here he comes." Again, no referee. Again, audience laughter. Things weren't looking too good for the corporate team. "Well, I guess I'll have to drag him out myself," Vince yelled before storming up the ramp. I small-talked in mid-ring with the Stooges before Pat Patterson picked up the mic and in his eloquent style introduced the world to the special referee. "Ladies and gentlemen, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, Vince McMahon!" With that, Vince came bounding down the ramp, sporting a referee shirt that must have been 8 sizes too small. In an attempt to show off his impressive physique, Vince was wearing a shirt so small that my son Dewey would have had trouble squeezing into it. The deck was clearly stacked against Austin, and the time seemed right for a new champion. A corporate champion. A kiss-ass champion. I was ready. I've mentioned before that I consider Mind Games against Shawn Michaels to be my best match. The future King of the Ring was probably the most emotional. Over the Edge with Austin, however, was undoubtedly the most fun to watch. Don't get me wrong, I got the hell beaten out of me and I was so blown up, out of breath, that I must have been running on something other than oxygen for the last 10 minutes. But I've never before or since seen such a reaction from the boys as they watched the replay the following day. Smiles and laughter for 20 minutes as they watched our elaborate 20-minute epic drama unfold. Thinking about it now, it's a small miracle that things went as well as they did. In the World Wrestling Federation, we are often allowed to do third-party bookings, which means basically that we are allowed to work on our own time for other promoters. In the past year, that has usually meant signing autographs at memorabilia shops, malls, department stores, and car lots. But until promoters learned that wrestlers were nicer, cheaper, and more popular than overpriced real athletes, third-party bookings usually consisted of wrestling at small venues for large payoffs. I had 4 days off before my showdown with Austin. Resting up probably would have been the wisest thing, but I had just had trouble turning down 10 weeks worth of Memphis payoffs for one night in a sweaty high school gym. Hey, it might not have been glamorous, but at least it was profitable. So instead of concentrating on my big match and resting up for a cardio machine like Stone Cold, I wrestled in 4 shows in 3 days in the boonies of Ohio and then drove 500 miles to Milwaukee. I was exhausted and questioning my intelligence when I showed up. Somehow, we pulled off a classic. Pat Patterson came out first as my announcer and proceeded to read off a long, scripted, ridiculous series of introductions. I came out to the Dude Love theme, Natalie attired in sports coat and flowered blue pastel tights. I was dancing just a little, but not enough to ruin my corporate image. I never understood why a retro hippie would go out to a faux Bee Gees disco number, but now that when I threw in the corporate image, it was completely confusing. I guess the dude was a disco dancing corporate hippie. Nonetheless, Patterson continued announcing my opponent. The bell rang and we started the match with a little bit of believe it or not scientific wrestling. Don't worry, not too much. Just a couple of reversals that led to a cover and a quick 1 count by Vince. The fast count earned Vince the ire of The Undertaker, who had been brought down by Austin to watch his back. For the rest of the match, Vince played it straight, but by virtue of his mannerisms, made it clear who he was pulling for. I even saw the Adam's apple bob up and down a couple of times when the dude kicked out of a two close pinfall attempts. A few minutes into the match, I took the advantage on Austin. I was choking him out outside the ring when Vince suddenly got wide-eyed and ran over to Patterson. This is just a reminder, boomed Pat's voice, which still carried a French-Canadian accent even after over 30 years in the States, that this match is a no disqualification match. That's not fair, Jim Ross informed the Stone viewers. This match doesn't have any stipulations. Austin eventually took over, but the dude used a diabolical ball shot to send the champ to the outside. As I was putting the boots to Austin halfway up the entrance aisle, Vince got that wide-eyed look again and sprinted down the aisle and around the ring to Patterson. A moment later, Pat was on the mic. Just a reminder, in this match, falls count anywhere in the building. Oh, that's great, said a sarcastic JR. I guess they're just making up the rules as they go along. The impromptu falls count anywhere provision gave us the excuse to work our way over to where a series of parked cars made up the over-the-edge set. We spent the next few minutes liberally destroying the already destroyed vehicles, including a dude-love backdrop that saw Austin smash the front windshield. At one point, with Austin prone in the aisle, the dude ascended two cars, which were stacked precariously on top of one another. I dove off the hood looking for the elbow, but when Austin moved, I uncharacteristically cheesed out and landed partly on my feet instead of on my hip. The fight continued into the ring until Austin finally gained the upper hand and caught me with a vicious chair to the face. At that point, the match should have been over, but Vince refused to make the count. Realizing that a screwing was at hand, Stone Cold got in Vince's face, while I came to my senses and picked up a steel chair that Patterson slid me. I came charging and brought the chair down hard, but Austin moved, and my boss took a shot so hard that it literally knocked the caps on his teeth off. I caught Austin with the claw, and before he even went down, Patterson slid in as an apparent substitute ref and attempted to count Austin out. Before he could get to three, however, the Undertaker slid him outside and promptly chokeslammed him. Now it was Gerald Briscoe's turn to slide in, attempt a ludicrous three count, and get pulled out and chokeslammed through a table. I got up and turned into Austin's Sunner, and Steve made the count himself with Vince's very hand. The next night I came out on Raw with an eye that was visibly swollen and discolored from my chair to the face the previous night. What followed was a memorable verbal interaction with Mr. McMahon, which left the dude without his bride and without his job. Dude Love had been fired, Cactus Jack had been retired, leaving only one persona who was still eligible for a paycheck. That's right, the return of Mankind, who had last been seen almost 6 months earlier. I'd like to say that Mankind's return was an instant success, but in reality it was met with the type of apathy usually reserved for Al Snow matches. Yes. Running a weekly 2-hour wrestling program head-to-head against well-financed competition is exciting and often makes for remarkable television, but the speed with which issues are rushed sometimes leaves creative casualties behind. Unfortunately, Mankind was one of those casualties. I just completed a very emotional interview with Vince McMahon. I'm not saying I was really fired, but I thought it was a good representation of reality. Not everyone can hit his boss when he wants to. Usually the boss holds the ball and the employee has to play by the rules. I had been embarrassed by my boss on national television, and it felt like there was a part of everyone that could feel for me. When I came running out just an hour later as Mankind, it was almost as if I was wearing a hospital gown and pulling an IV stand behind me. Mankind has gone on to incredible heights since that poorly received run-in, but at the time the rapid character changes led to credibility problems that would be tough to overcome. I'd been tentatively scheduled to face Stone Cold at the June King of the Ring pay-per-view in a special Hell in a Cell match. Hell in a Cell was a match that was devised 8 months earlier as a special attraction for the Shawn Michaels Undertaker feud. The cell referred to an ominous-looking 16-foot-high steel mesh structure with a matching ceiling. The cell was so large that, unlike other cages, it literally surrounded the ring. The first cell match had been outstanding, probably the best match of 1997, and the feeling was that a sequel would do big business. Unfortunately, as I learned with the aid of a phone call, the feeling was that Foley vs. Austin 3 wouldn't. Vince Russo broke the news, and as he did, I could feel my heart sink. I knew that Mankind wasn't over, but I was hoping that the office wouldn't catch on to the current apathy for a while. Russo's comments made me realize they had. Cactus, we're just concerned that the audience won't buy another match with you and Steve. How could I disagree? At this point, I didn't think they would buy a match with me against anyone. Who knows, maybe a Mankind versus Al Snow match with the loser must wrestle Pete Gas for a year stipulation wasn't far away. I decided to verify my intention by asking Russo, so I'm definitely out of the cell match, I said with a whole lot of sadness in my voice. No, an excited Russo corrected me. You're still in the cell. It's just that you'll be in there with The Undertaker. Austin will wrestle Kane for the title. I was overjoyed, but minutes after hanging up, I was plagued with feelings of certain failure in the cell. I'm screwed, I thought. I suck inside a cage. Undertaker has a broken foot. No one cares about me, and besides, Was the world really calling out for a sixth Mankind Undertaker pay-per-view encounter? At that point, I had no idea that it would be the most talked about match of my career. A couple of weeks before the show, I made the tactical error of stopping by the World Wrestling Federation corporate offices in Stamford, Connecticut. It wasn't stopping there that was the error, it was whom I brought with me. The legendary bastion of common sense, Terry Funk. We were on our way to Providence from a show in Connecticut, and we decided to stop by the office for a workout. Titan Towers probably was the most well equipped gym of any office building in the country. After I finished punishing my pectorals and bombing my biceps, I called and asked the home video department if I could take a look at Bad Blood, the pay per view during which last year's Hell in a Cell had taken place. I sat in a little office with the Funker as we watched Hell in a Cell unfold. Damn, I was thinking as I sat there watching Michaels and The Undertaker tear the house down. There's no way we're going to live up to this. There was one part in particular that had been impressive. It consisted of a frantic Michaels climbing outside of the cell to get away from the unstoppable Undertaker. He got to the top, but there was nowhere to go, and Taker had wreaked havoc all over the top of the cell. Michaels had actually been backdropped and slammed on the ceiling, and I winced at the sight of the 200-pound Heartbreak Kid's body bouncing off the steel mesh. Finally, Michaels was dangling precariously off the side of the cage and ended up dropping onto the table from about the 8-foot mark in a scene that would live on for the next year via video highlights. Terry and I just sat there for a few minutes without saying a word. Finally, Terry spoke up. Cactus, he mumbled. That one is going to be difficult to beat. I know, I agreed. Plus, I'm 100 pounds heavier than Sean. I just can't do some of the things in the cage that he can. Once again, we sat in silence for a couple of minutes. I was the one to break the silence. What do you think I should do? I asked my mentor, friend, and hero. His answer would help me professionally and damn near break me physically. I think you ought to start the match on top of the cage. You'd think I would know better than to listen to Terry Funk. We continued to talk on the way to the show, but it was mostly joking around. Goddamn, Cac, the Funker said, laughing. Maybe you should let him throw you off the top of the cage. Yeah, I shot back. Then I could climb back up, and he could throw me off again. Man, that was a good one. We were having a good time thinking of completely ludicrous things to do inside, outside, and on top of the cage. After a while, I got serious and said quietly to Terry, I think I could do it. It took quite a while for me to remember the events surrounding Hell in a Cell, which should give you some indication as to how it turned out. It took several weeks and repeated viewings of the match itself to piece the whole scene together. I felt like kind of a private eye trying to put together the mystery of my own life. Now, almost a year later, I've got a good handle on the biggest and most memorable night of my 15-year career. I had told The Undertaker a week before the match that I was planning on starting the match on top of the cage. He hadn't seemed real positive about it. Let's face it, I had to tell him. Otherwise, if he walked out, saw me standing on the top and decided not to follow, I would look like a big dummy climbing back down. Every day I would ask him, and every day he would shoot it down. The day before the match, I asked him again. He shook his head and asked me a question, not as the deep and dark Undertaker, but as a guy who had known me for 8 years and who had, over the course of some titanic battles, developed a bond with me. We'd beaten each other half to death, it seemed, and then looked out for each other when we were hurt. We hadn't ridden together or shared a room since we first hooked up under different names, but we nonetheless shared a deep and mutual respect. Jack, he said, why are you so intent on killing yourself up there? Because, I answered seriously, I'm afraid this match is going to stink. You can't walk, and let's face it, I don't have any heat. We've got a heck of a legacy to live up to, and I don't want this match to ruin it. If we can start it out hot enough, we can make people think we had a hell of a match, even if we didn't. Taker thought it over, and I thought I could see him cracking. I'll think about it, he said before we parted ways. My music played, and I walked down the aisle with my trusty steel chair. I got to the cage and threw the chair to the top, as I planned to make use of it later. I put my fingers in the mesh and started to climb. I slipped. I tried to climb again, but my toes wouldn't fit into the mesh to get a foothold. I cursed my half thimbleful of natural athletic ability. For a minute, I didn't think I'd ever be able to climb the damn thing. I did, but it sure as hell wasn't pretty, and when I got to the top, I had no feeling in my right index finger from pulling so hard on the fence. It would actually take a week for all the feeling to come back. I stood up there in nervous anticipation, and the scene recalled the memory of my scaffold match in Fort Worth. I enjoyed the feeling of power, but at the same time feared the results of what was about to go down. I had a sick feeling in my stomach, and my legs felt as if they could barely keep me up. A loud bong signaled the imminent arrival of the Undertaker, and the Pittsburgh Civic Arena rose in unison in anticipation of his eerie entrance. I had seen that entrance at least 100 times, but it still often gave me the chills. I remembered the way I felt when his music played in the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis as we got ready to be buried alive. Paul Bearer had looked at me that night and showed me his arm, which was lined with goosebumps. I had smiled and shown him mine, which were equally bumped. This was different, though. I was confident then. Quite frankly, I was scared as hell now. A blue spotlight shone, and the Pittsburgh fans held up lighters, as was the custom when the Phenom was about to walk the aisle. Theatrical smoke filled the entranceway, and when he was there, walking through the smoke like a 6 foot 10 inch John Wayne. Damn, I wish I had an entrance like that, I thought as I took the opportunity to look down at the Spanish announcing team, who had the most hazardous job of the business. The height was incredible, 16 feet down, but over 22 feet from my vantage point. I'd been scared before, but it had always been a good scared. This was not good at all. I saw no chance for a happy ending. I walked back to face the aisle, and the taker was about to ascend. This is it, I thought. Showtime. Taker climbed the mesh, and even with a broken foot, he did it a hell of a lot quicker than I did. He peeked his head up, and I gave him a shot, which left him hanging by a hand. Another one had him dangling again, but he blocked a third and came firing back. This gave him time to get up, but when he did, I was there to meet with a chair across the back. Thwack! It was a good one. Thwack! Again. Another solid shot. I took the taker and started to walk with him. The crowd gasped as the cage sagged and almost gave way. We took another step, and the cage sagged even more beneath our 600 pounds. I attempted to suplex him on my chair, but he cut me off and had me headed toward the edge of the cell structure. He grabbed me by my shirt and trunks, and suddenly, I was airborne, 16 feet high and falling fast as the Spanish announcers dove for cover. It was the scariest moment of my life, but almost a relief when I landed on the announcer table and felt it crumble beneath my weight. I'd missed the monitors, which was my biggest concern, and landed about as perfectly as one could hope for, but the impact had swung me halfway underneath the security railing so that my legs were in the audience. My upper body, meanwhile, was covered with the debris of the table. Good God Almighty! JR had yelled upon the impact. With God as my witness, he's been broken in half! Actually, I felt surprisingly all right as I lay there among the wreckage. My shoulder was hurting as it had become dislocated from the fall, and I felt a dull pain in my kidney area. Other than that, I felt okay. I actually had a feeling of inner peace about me as was tended to by officials, Terry, and even Vince, who had been broken character by being legitimately concerned. At least, I mistakenly thought as I enjoyed the attention, the worst is over. I was about as wrong in that assessment as a human being could possibly be. The reaction of the crowd was phenomenal. I've never experienced or seen a reaction like it before, and I doubt I ever will again. For several days after the fact, I would watch the video, and I never ceased to be amazed by the reaction. It was like a chain reaction as every single person in the place stood up, even though there was nothing left to see but a prone human body lying beneath what used to be a table. Good God, he's been. I'd hear. Then I would rewind the tape. Good God, he's. Rewind. Good God! Rewind. The reaction lasted for minutes, changing from yells of disbelief to rhythmic hockey chants of Undertaker! Clap, clap, clap. Taker looked almost mythical as he stood perched atop the cage, especially when the cage began to ascend to make room for the stretcher, which was accompanied by a crew of emergency medical technicians. The technicians placed me on the gurney, and JR apologized for the short duration of the match. How can you apologize for that? Countered Jerry the King Lawler as I was rolled up the aisle. The Undertaker was already down the cage and on the floor when I rolled off the gurney and got to my feet. Can you believe this? Said JR in disbelief as I attempted once again to scale the cage. And he's got a smile on his face. Climbing the cell with a dislocated shoulder was no easy task, but this time I wasn't scared or hesitant. I was running on adrenaline. I was literally flying in my heart as the Undertaker and I both raced to the top. The crowd reaction was unbelievable. They had sworn the match was over. They had just seen the damnedest thing in the history of the business, and now we were going to give them more. If I could change one thing about the match, it would be my next effort. A dynamic exchange of punches atop the 16-foot structure would have sent the crowd into a frenzy, but instead, I stood there slug-like as the Undertaker battered me without any retaliation. He clubbed me once across my back with a chair and then unceremoniously dropped it on the cage. I really wish he would have put it somewhere else. Then he grabbed me around the neck for the goozle, or chokeslam. I didn't remember a thing about the next 2 minutes as I watched the tape in great pain the next day. It was the only time in 15 years that I have been knocked out cold. I had been knocked goofy countless times. I'd seen stars and rainbows and black patches as a way of life for a long time, but this was the first time that a period of time elapsed, and I wasn't aware of it. Like I said earlier, however, video and time have helped me to not only see but remember almost everything. Everything except what I was feeling as I broke through the mesh and crashed to the canvas. Looking back on it now, it was both the worst chokeslam and the best chokeslam that I'd ever taken. The worst because it was the only time in my association with The Undertaker that I hadn't gotten high for the goozle. As a matter of fact, one of my feet never left the cage. The best because if I'd taken it correctly, I very well might have been dead. As it was, I landed hard on my back, my neck, and the back of my head. If I'd gone higher, I probably would have landed directly on my head, and I probably wouldn't be here, at least not in control of my limbs. It was indeed a violent, brutal fall, made worse by the fact that I landed in one of the old Federation rings, which have little give. The new Federation rings obviously have some give to them, actually too much for my taste. But the old rings were torturous in their stiffness, and guys were getting hurt too often and careers were ending early. As a concession, new rings were made, and yes, they bounce, but to tell you the truth, the fans don't seem to care. To make matters worse, the chair that placed on the cage followed my body down and smashed into my face from a height of 12.5 feet. The blow to my face would result in 1.5 teeth being knocked out, a dislocated jaw, and a hole beneath my lip that I could stick my tongue through. Enough is enough! Would somebody stop the damn match? JR yelled as the ring filled up immediately with medical personnel, office personnel, and Terry Funk. I get goosebumps thinking about it even now, as Ross' call was not part of a wrestling match, but a legitimate cry for my well being. It was probably the most dramatic call I've ever heard in any sport. Purists can have the Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant, but I'll take would somebody stop the damn match any day. Francois Petit and the EMTs tried to help me as I lay on my back with my arms outstretched and my legs sickly twisted to one side. I later asked the Undertaker what he thought when he looked down at me from atop the cell. His answer was chilling in its simplicity. I thought you were dead. I actually rolled over at one point, and when I regained consciousness, I saw a pair of sneakers in the ring. That's strange, I thought as I tried to gain my bearings. What happened while I was out was actually a marvel of impromptu ingenuity and a credit to the business. As I mentioned in the first chapter, in a real sport, the action would surely stop if a player was knocked out. But no, we are not a real sport, and no, the action doesn't stop. Instead, all the guys tried to buy me some time in hopes that I would come to in time. The Undertaker held onto the cage, but Free fell several feet, and you could see him visibly wince and hobble from the pain in his broken foot. Unlike gymnast Kerry Strug, who vaulted to fame on the basis of one landing on a sprained ankle, there would be no White House visits for the Undertaker. Only the recognition from the people who know what a tough bastard he really is. Terry Funk was there to meet him and willingly took a chokeslam to give me more time. TV showed multiple replays of my fall through the cage, and when they came back, I was on my feet, but just barely. I don't believe it, said his son JR. He's either crazy, or he's the toughest SOB I've ever seen. How is he still standing? Inquired the king, to which JR quickly answered, I don't have a damn clue. The Undertaker threw a punch, and I went down. Slowly. It may have been the saddest bump ever taken because there was no strength left in my body. I don't want to sound dramatic or pat myself on the back, but I really had been standing on sheer will alone. Now as I lay in a heap, it seemed that even my will was gone. Jack, let's go home, the Taker quietly said to me. No, no, I'm okay, I replied in a statement that had to be right up there with telling Vince I liked Mason the Mutilator as the biggest whopper I ever told. He took hold of my hand and in a trademark Taker move ascended to the top rope. Usually this move results in a flying massive forearm across the chest, but this was no usual match, and I forced the dead man off his perch so that he crouched himself on the top rope. In reality, he was trying to buy me more time, as it was still readily apparent that while the lights might have been on, there was nobody home. Students of the wrestling game have talked about this match for the last year, and most of the accolades have been in my direction, as if The Undertaker was just some innocent bystander who happened to be in this historic match. The truth is, without The Undertaker's poise and experience, the match would have been over right after the choke slam through the cage. The Hell in a Cell is actually the closest example I've ever seen of one wrestler bottle feeding another until I was able to take my first baby steps. With The Undertaker temporarily incapacitated, the camera zoomed in on me to discover two rather odd findings. One, I appeared to be smiling, and two, there was something white sticking out of my nose. Actually, I wasn't smiling, but was trying to let the camera get a look at me, sticking my tongue through the hole under my lip. Unfortunately, with all the blood and facial hair in the way, the audience didn't get to share that special moment. As far as the white thing sticking out of my nose, it was not, as first thought, a piece of table or even a white booger. It was actually half of a tooth. How it got there has been the subject of a great deal of speculation. The tooth almost seemed like the magic bullet in the JFK assassination. Did it go through the mouth and out hit the sinus cavity, as some felt, or was it more likely to have just moved the 2 inches from mouth to nose, as I have come to believe? That intrigued to the plot. Just who picked up the whole tooth that was lying on the mat and had it resting in a glass of milk when I returned from the ring? The match continued for several minutes, and as the fog in my brain lifted, I realized that my right kidney area was in tremendous pain. Look at the videotape reveals that the kidney is where the initial contact with the table was made. As I mounted an offense, I followed up a pile driver on a chair with a leg drop that is given with what the same chair placed over the taker's face. When I landed, I was aware of the incredible pain. That kidney would actually hurt me for the next 8 weeks. After the leg drop, I struck my opponent with a double-armed DDT and bailed out of the ring to search for the special surprise that I had promised the fans. I returned with a large canvas bag. I reached into my special bag and withdrew it to reveal about 100 silver tacks that sparkled in the light of the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, the Igloo. I scattered the tacks on the ground, and as the crowd stood in anticipation, I dumped the contents of the entire bag, revealing about 6,000 tacks in all. Since I introduced thumbtacks into the world of sports entertainment 3 years earlier, they had begun making their presence in small, independent shows, but this was the first national exposure that the pushpins had garnered. The crowd was truly caught up in the scene as I hammered away at the Phenom, and he seemed primed to fall when I hit the ropes for the final blow. Instead, he caught me around the neck in preparation for the goozle, but a knee to his midsection got me free. I hit the ropes again, but this time was met with a big boot to the face. I didn't go down, but bounced off the ropes again, only to be hoisted onto my opponent's shoulder for his tombstone piledriver. I slid down his back and hooked on my finishing hold. Mandible Claw! Mandible Claw! Jim Ross yelled. No one holds more victories over the Undertaker than mankind, and a good many of them came from that very hold. The Undertaker went down to his knees, and I slid behind him while still employing the claw. In an instant, though, Taker had me on his back in the exact same fashion that Vader had at Halloween Havoc in 1993. In this case, however, I wasn't looking for my career to end, just the match, in what I hoped would be a dramatic fashion. The crowd was buzzing in expectation of the only logical conclusion in this predicament. Bam! There it was. The audience groaned as I writhed in pain among the tacks. I was up slowly with several hundred tacks sticking into my flesh and clothes. I was hit with a choke slam that sent me right back into the shiny metallic resting place from which I'd just risen. My God, what else can be done? What else will the Undertaker do to mankind? Yelled JR. And the question was answered immediately as a tombstone spelled the end of what countless fans have told me was the greatest match they ever saw. Mercifully, this is over, Lawler commented as the fans cheered in appreciation of the spectacle they had just seen. For the next several minutes, highlights of the match were replayed as JR tried to sum up what had just taken place. In 25 years, I've never witnessed anything even remotely resembling this, he stated. These two gave you everything in their bodies. They gave you their souls here tonight. And this has been perhaps the most ungodly match that I think we will ever see. I lay there for a few minutes as Francois, the Funker, and the referees checked on my condition. The EMTs brought a stretcher into the ring, and as they loaded me on, the camera showed me whispering to referee Mike Chioda. Was I already on a stretcher once tonight? I asked Chioda in a conversation I had no recollection of, even after he reminded me the next day. Yes, Jack, you were, was Chioda's reply. Then can you help me up, Mike? I don't want to be on a stretcher twice in one night. With the assistance of Chioda and Terry Funk, I was then helped to the back as a chorus of Foley, Foley made its way to my 1.5 ears. JR then summed up as I staggered through the curtain by saying, How can anyone not admire the effort of this man, mankind? Mick Foley is beyond me. When I walked through the curtain, I was met by a sound of applause from the remaining wrestlers and a hug from Vince McMahon. Despite recent media portrayals of Vince, he was genuinely concerned with my well-being. I responded by talking way too much, way too fast, and way too intelligently for a guy who had just been through hell. He had to have known that I was messed up. He was almost like a drunk driver who tries so hard to act sober that he gives himself away. My in-ring conversation with Mike Chioda was not the only one I failed to recollect. Several days after the match, I asked The Undertaker if I had spoken to him afterward. He laughed as he recalled our discussion. Did I use thumbtacks out there? Is apparently what I had come out with. He looked at me still covered with the damn thing and said, Yes, you did, Jack. Yes, you did. Oh, good, I reportedly said and walked away. My evening wasn't quite over yet, though. Francois put my shoulder back in its socket, helped me gain my bearings, and I limped out to play a part in the finish of the Kane vs. Austin match. When I came back through the curtain, I was led to a spare room by Dr. Frank Romascavage, who, without the aid of a local anesthetic, put 14 stitches below my lip. Vince observed the whole process while a Federation cameraman caught the magic moment on film. Afterward, Vince walked me to my dressing room. Mick, I want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for this company, he said sincerely as I nodded blankly. But please, promise me that I'll never see you do anything like it ever again. It was now an hour after the conclusion of the saga, and I had forgotten one very important detail, my traditional post-match call to Colette. Even if I had remembered, it would have been impossible to call, as I had neglected to pay my phone bill and our line had been disconnected. She had actually packed up the kids, who had cried themselves to sleep, and taken them to our gym to await some word of my condition. I was just about to be taken to the hospital when Dave Hebner stopped me. Cactus, your wife, beat me, and I just got off the phone with her. She's very upset, and she wants you to call her at the gym. I was not quite ready for our conversation. You can't do this to us, Mickey, she cried, and when I say cried, I do mean cried. Your children love you, and you can't do this to them. I love you, and you can't do this to me. Please, promise me you won't do this anymore. I hadn't apologized so much since I took Noelle on the Back to the Future ride at Universal Studios, and she thought the dinosaur had really swallowed us. For a long time, the trauma that this match caused my wife had me on the brink of retiring, and Hell in a Cell is still a sensitive subject at home. I watched the match today in preparation for writing about it, and it's still a year after the fact made Colette cry. My children, however, now think the match is cool. For a long time, however, Dewey and Noelle were haunted by the match, especially Noelle. Historically, many wrestlers have not smartened up their kids and have led them to believe that Dad is fighting for his life every night. From what I have seen of such cases, such psychology leads to nothing but problems, as children are petrified for their dad, only to later learn that he was a liar and a phony. In a few extreme examples, such deceit has led to long-term estrangement of father and children. I approached the situation from an entirely different perspective. I told my kids that I never got hurt and that Daddy was simply playing. Hell in a Cell was the night that my kids learned that Big Daddy O was a big liar, and as a result, they thought I was getting hurt all the time. For months, I would talk to my daughter on the phone and she would say, "Good luck, don't get hurt." To which I would soothingly say, "Don't worry, honey, I won't." Inevitably, I would hear her little voice a moment later as it sadly said, "I know you're going to get hurt." I went to the hospital after my phone call with my tooth in its cup of milk. This is done to keep the tooth vital. I have no idea how. After 4 hours, I emerged with my missing tooth shoved back into its hole and a plethora of dental wires to support it. I hadn't even been aware enough to ask about several of the other body parts that hurt, in particular my kidney, which was throbbing with each step. I stumbled into the Red Roof Inn about 3 a.m., and Al Snow was sensitive enough to inquire about my condition without once using the word hammer or any imaginative way of describing his penis. Hell, he probably did, but I was just too out of it to notice. I generally pride myself on how much punishment I can take without the aid of pain medication. For example, I was given a whole bottle of pain pills following my knee surgery and only took one pill in 4 days. I will admit, however, to taking so much medication after Hell in a Cell that I was in a stupor for the next 2 days. I looked like a cross between Popeye Doyle when he was strung out on Smack and the French Connection 2, and an audience after sitting through an Al Snow match. When I got to the television taping the next day, Francois worked on my poor body for hours while I continually asked female wrestler Luna Vachon to check on the pay-per-view replay on the cafeteria. I stumbled into the cafeteria and took a seat. As I mentioned earlier, much of what I was seeing was new to me, and I was shaking with emotion while I watched it despite my chemically induced condition. When the match ended, I was surprised to see the entire cafeteria, which was filled with the boys, give me a standing ovation. I've never before or since seen a videotape get a standing ovation. It felt very good. Many people point to King of the Ring as the match that catapulted my career to the top. Actually, I found this not to be the case. To me, the match of The Undertaker is kind of like the famous Billy Mays catch in the World Series over 30 years ago, and that it has grown in legend. A review of the Cell match shows my entrance receiving almost no reaction, and even the chants of Foley, Foley in Pittsburgh were depressingly slight. In reality, I found my career to be somewhat sluggish after the famous showdown, with 3 specific moments sticking out as low points in my career. 2 weeks after the Cell match, I was given interview time to hype an Undertaker rematch on the Federation's new Sunday Night Heat television show on the USA Network. I went out with mic in hand and in my own ECW fashion tried to make the fans feel what it was like to have my career nearly end. Within 48 hours, I had gone from my daughter kissing me on the cheek at Santa's Village, because you're a good man, to having my tooth sticking out of my nose. What I got from the crowd was apathy and disrespect. As I poured out my heart, fans were yelling obscenities and filling the ring with garbage. It was the first time that I clearly felt that the new Federation Attitude Era had passed me by. Cool guys were in, Mick Foley was out. Catchphrases were in, interviews that required an audience to think were out. I came back to the dressing room and I was livid. Paul Bearer was the first one to come in after me, and as such, he caught the brunt of my anger. Damn it, Purse. I don't know what I'm doing this anymore. These people don't give a fuck, unless it's a catchy phrase or a set of tits. Uncle Paul tried to calm me down. Mommy, he said. Purse had been calling me Mommy ever since a short-lived teaming when I was hooked up with Goldust as a mommy figure. It's not you. It's the end of a long night, and they're tired. I wasn't buying it. They're not tired. They're assholes, Purse. And you know what? I'm an asshole, too, for even giving a damn. A long time passed before I felt good about performing again. About a week after the interview incident, I suffered an even greater indignity, this time at the hands of Rena Mero. We were both brought into Fall River, Massachusetts for a fundraiser and set up at separate tables for autographs. I guess a blind man can see where this one is heading. After a 30-minute rash of autograph seekers, I sat in silence while a parade of horny teenagers paraded past me and plopped down their $10 for Rena's autograph and a peek at her cleavage. I was literally sick to my stomach. My body still ached from the Hell in a Cell, which the Fall River fans were acknowledging as the greatest match they had ever seen, while they walked past with arena photos in hand. I guess to add to my precious list, big boobs were in, and dedication, sacrifice, and 14 years of blood, sweat, and tears were out. My third low point reared its ugly head right after our July pay-per-view in which Austin and The Undertaker had teamed to defeat Kane and me. It hadn't been a great match, but it was certainly very good. Afterward, I was scheduled to do an autograph session with Owen Hart at the hotel across the street from the San Jose Arena. I arrived at the hotel and was greeted by a line about 400 people long. When the session started, I went right to work. I knew I couldn't personalize the pictures or even talk to the fans much, as we would be hard-pressed to satisfy the voracious appetite of the fans. 10 minutes later, the line did more than just slow down. It stopped. What's going on? I asked Owen. There's still hundreds of people in line. Owen laughed as he was privy to information that was unknown to me. Jack, they're here to see Austin and Shamrock at 11. Our line is done. I felt my heart drop down to somewhere in the vicinity of my left ball. You mean we have to wait here until then? Owen seemed to take cruel pleasure in seeing my feelings shattered as he chuckled. I hope you brought a book. These were the longest 2 hours of my life. Every once in a while, a straggler would give in and get a picture, and in contrast to the quick mankind signature the other fans had gotten, these lucky few were able to get my life story in their photo. Dear Johnny, a typical one would start, it matters not how narrow the gate, nor how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the captain of my fate and the master of my soul. Have a nice day. Your friend Mankind, two-time tag team champion. I really had doubts about my future. I had always been able to adapt to changing elements, but the phenomenon had gotten so big so fast that a guy like me had gotten trampled in the dust. In the same way that most kids would rather scarf down a couple of greasy fast food burgers instead of enjoying an aged and seasoned filet mignon, the new breed of fan wanted satisfaction and wanted it now. Our show was tearing up the Nielsen's to the point that a great deal of our audience was completely new to the world of sports entertainment. They had no knowledge of my feuds with Abdullah the Butcher or Eddie Gilbert, and in truth, only half of them had even seen my interviews with Jim Ross. Actually, only a year had passed since those interviews, but I doubted that our new fans would even have the patience to sit through those, unless, of course, I showed a little cleavage. I decided to take a gamble. As I mentioned earlier, the best gimmicks in wrestling are actually extensions of a real life personality. I was feeling a lot like a battered and beaten man that time that had left behind and was confused because of it. I decided to portray myself as a battered and beaten man that time had left behind and was confused because of it. I knew for a fact that many of our fans were not actually cool. I gambled that they would get into a character that likewise was not. I had already begun wearing a torn up collared shirt and tie to the ring, and now I had my reason. The shirt and tie would represent my last remaining connection to the corporate world that had shunned me. In a sense, the outfit was my connection to Vince McMahon, who was the company's hottest heel and was the perfect guy to play off of. I went to SummerSlam in Madison Square Garden as a co-holder of the tag team belts with Kane. We were the bad guys going up against the now beloved New Age Outlaws, but I was starting to get little lines and sight gags in, and the fans were slowly but surely starting to catch on. The Kane Mankind team was falling apart as well. It had been revealed through an intricate storyline that Kane and The Undertaker were actually in cahoots. With the memory of King of the Ring still fresh in my mind, the cahoots thing hadn't sat too well with me, and Kane and I had started a feud of our own even though we held the tag belts. As a result, Kane never showed up for the match, leaving me to valiantly take on the Outlaws until Kane popped out of the dumpster and smashed my skull with his sledgehammer. 2 weeks later, I showed up with a bruised face, a heavily wrapped hand, and an announcement that I'd been lucky for two reasons. One, I was able to block the blow with my hand, and two, I really didn't look all that good to begin with. September 13th, 1998 was a fateful day in my career. I did something on that day that a few years or even 1 year earlier I would have thought impossible. I politely turned down a chance to return full time as Cactus Jack and pleaded with Vince Russo to leave me as Mankind. Why? Russo wanted to know. I thought we were doing you a favor. I know, and I appreciate it, I answered back. This was a big moment and I knew it, so I didn't want to regret anything later. It's just that I think I could do everything you have planned for Cactus as Mankind, and I really feel that Mankind is just getting rolling. Russo laughed. Well, Vince will be happy, he said. He's always liked Mankind best. He just thought you'd be happier as Cactus. You know, up until a week ago, I would have agreed, I responded, but I'm starting to get a little soft spot in my heart for Mankind. By the way, I had an idea. What is it? Russo wanted to know. Well, you know how all the babyfaces hate Vince? Russo nodded his head in agreement. Well, what if I was the one guy who liked Vince and it drove him crazy? I think it would be great. Russo smiled a genuine smile and told me, I'll run it by Vince. I think he'll like it. As it turned out, Vince did indeed like it, and thus began our strange pseudo father-son relationship that some felt was meant to mock Bret Hart, but in reality was just meant to be fun. At the TV tapings in San Jose, the short-lived team of Mankind, The Rock, and Ken Shamrock was wreaking havoc on Vince's corporation until Vince pulled the gullible Mankind aside to talk some sense into him. Mick, I don't want your new friends to get hurt, and I know you don't either, Vince gently told me with his arm around my shoulder. So maybe the best thing you can do is take Shamrock and The Rock and just convince them to leave. Okay, Mick? Now go ahead. Get your friends and just leave. I thought over Vince's proposition, but saw one problem with it. Okay, Vince, I replied, but I don't drive and I need a ride. Vince started to laugh. I'm sorry, Mick, you caught me off guard with that. He smiled as the camera stopped rolling. Sorry, Vince, I apologized. It just came out. Vince disregarded my apology. No, that's great. As a matter of fact, don't tell me what you're going to say anymore. I'll just react to it. That set the tone for the entire Mankind McMahon sequence of events, with Mankind and Vince ad-libbing their way through their unique love-hate relationship. Mankind loved Vince, and Vince hated Mankind. At the next set of tapings, which would turn out to be my biggest merchandising coup, Vince Russo came running up to me in the dressing room of the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. Vince just hurt his ankle. They're putting him on a stretcher now. He was practically hyperventilating. He wants you to be there, and he doesn't want you to know what you're going to do. Surprise him. Hell, I didn't even know what to do, so I ran as fast as my concrete battered body would carry me. Along the way, I picked up a few props. When I got to Vince, he was just about to be loaded into an ambulance. His gang of stooges were all around him. Amid the concern and the corporate brown nosing, a hairy arm came into view, cradling a 7-Eleven big gulp. I pushed the massive cup toward Vince's face, and his expression was priceless. The gulp disappeared, but then reappeared a moment later as I diligently tried to get some frosty refreshment into Vince McMahon's gullet. Would you get him out of here? McMahon screamed, and momentarily mankind was gone. A moment later, that same hairy arm was back, this time holding small pieces of candy. As Vince was being loaded into the ambulance, the arm kept trying to slip the candies into Vince's pocket. Again, his face was classic. Vince has a face that somehow lets him convey multiple emotions at once. In this case, it was disgust, pain, and even a little bit of pity. It seemed that I had found a formula that worked. I would kill him with kindness. The next day in East Lansing, Michigan, Russo informed me that I would go visit Vince in the hospital. He wanted me to cheer him up, but again I was told that Vince didn't want to know the specifics. Within an hour, I had lined up a veritable smorgasbord of hokey gifts and entertainment. I was loaded to the hilt with get well soon balloons, an inflated rubber glove, a cheesy heart-shaped box of chocolates, and a clown named Yerple with floppy purple shoes who specialized in balloon animals. Even with all the top-flight entertainment, I needed that special something. I needed just one more special trick to really brighten Vince's day. In a decision that would both help and haunt me, I grabbed Al Snow. Al, I've got a problem, I said. I'm going to visit Vince in the hospital, and I've got a bunch of great gimmicks I'm bringing with me, but I feel like I need maybe one more. What's something really stupid that I can bring with me that Vince will hate? Al thought it over inside that pea-sized brain of his and quickly replied, How about a sock puppet? Happy now, Al? Are you? Happy, happy, happy? Well, I certainly hope so. Man, it hurts to admit it, but yes, Al Snow did think of Mr. Sacco. Well, I guess we're even now, aren't we, Al, seeing as how I invented your whole head gimmick? The only difference is without Mr. Sacco, I'd still be a fairly popular wrestler. Without my head idea, Al would be doing my yard work. Would you like me to finish planting those seeds, Mr. Foley? No, no, that's all right, Al, but I have some special seed of my own that I'll be planting in a minute. Ha ha ha. Oh boy. Oh, that's good. Fake laugh works every time. The scenario was simple. Mr. McMahon was at an undisclosed hospital and was terrified that Stone Cold Steve Austin was going to find him. Although only the recipient of a bruised ankle bone, Vince was nonetheless bedridden with a heart monitor and an oxygen tube hooked up to him. He was being the ultimate cranky patient. Mr. McMahon, you got a visitor, a cheery nurse informed the miserable millionaire. Immediately, Vince's heart rate monitor started beeping faster. Him, yelled Vince. It's him! Why did you let him in here? The nurse remained rosy as she informed him. He was awful big, and he was real insistent on seeing you, and he threatened to beat up the orderlies if we didn't let him in. The door opened, and Vince prepared himself for the worst. Instead, an inflated surgical glove peeked its way inside the door with a big happy face on it. Turn that frown upside down, I said in my best goofy voice before bursting through the door. Vince's expressive face now showed both anger and relief as I approached him bearing gifts. I handed him the balloons, which were met with disinterest, and then presented him with the delicious chocolate morsels as I kidded my old grouchy boss. Come on, I know Vinny's got a sweet tooth. Vince actually opened the heart-shaped box and reacted with revulsion when he saw the contents. These chocolates are half-eaten, he mumbled in disbelief. I know, I got a little bored on the way over here, I replied, but wait till you see what I've got for you next. A little female entertainment, and I think you know what I mean. Vince, she does a trick with a dog that you won't believe. Vince's face actually cracked a tiny smile in anticipation of the hot act he was about to witness when I announced my special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Yerple! Then I followed the intro with the same weak verbal rendition of the Johnny Carson theme that my wife hates so much. Rindin da. With that, Yerple entered the room, and with her clown feet, purple hair, white face, and balloon animals, was threatening to steal the show. This woman was a professional, and years of children's birthday parties had honed her stage presence to the point that she was on the verge of stealing all my Monday night glory. I had heard a rumor that Burt Ward used to steal Adam West's glory on the old Batman series in much the same way. Damn it, I thought, as if I were George Clooney on ER. I'm losing him. Quickly, while Yerple was in the midst of a complex canine creation, I saw that the cameraman's back was to me, and I made my move. In a flash, I pulled out Mr. Sacco, got down on my belly, and combat crawled underneath the bed like a valiant marine in the sands of Iwo Jima. What the hell was that? Vince shouted as he felt the rustling beneath him. What the? All of a sudden, my hand and wrist were in the air with a dirty sweat sock over them. The face was hand drawn and was either beautiful in its simplicity or simply ugly, depending on how you look at it. The camera clearly showed my face, but that didn't stop me from being the worst high pitched ventriloquist act in the history of sports entertainment. Hi, I'm Mr. Sacco, and I've come to save the day. I hear you have a boo boo, and Mr. Sacco is going to kiss it and make it feel better. No, no, Vince interjected. Don't kiss the boo boo. This was great. I had a world famous multimillionaire genius for a boss, and thus far I had both hit him so hard with a chair that his dental worth had flown off and gotten him to say, No, no, don't kiss the boo boo on national television. Unfortunately for Vince, I overextended my reach and ended up lying on him, and as a result, instead of kissing the boo boo, I had inadvertently hurt the boo boo. Mr. McMahon had seen enough. Please, he implored us, please just take your things and go. When we were a little slow in leaving, he tried a more direct approach and said, Damn it, leave! Leave! He bellowed and sent us on our way amid a flurry of balloons and chocolate wrappers. After we left, the camera zoomed in on the beleaguered and outraged McMahon as he sarcastically repeated the two magic words, Mr. Sacco. The next day, many of the wrestlers were ribbing me about Mr. Sacco, but I really did not think too much about it. I thought it had been funny, but not any funnier than some of the other things we had been doing. Actually, Austin was Mr. Sacco's biggest fan. He'd seen the hospital shenanigans on a television monitor while preparing for a later bedside attack in which he violated Vince with a cardiac defibrillator and violated him with an enema tube. I thought it was great. I wasn't so willing to accept his adulation because I truly believed he was joking around with me. But throughout the day, he kept mentioning Mr. Sacco, so I finally asked him if he was serious. Jack, I'm not bullshitting you, he replied with typical Austin subtlety. That was one of the funniest damn things I've ever seen. Later, Russo came running over. It seems that the poor guy is always running. It's just my theory, but I don't think that Russo was ever the same after the Sackham Ward Melville bleacher clearing basketball brawl back in 1979. Did you bring Mr. Sacco? He gasped with an urgency that was reminiscent of Mike Brady searching for the missing blueprints during the Kings Island episode. Yeah, I calmly answered, but why? Cactus, I'm not kidding you, he began in his out-of-breath Brooklynness, Long Islandess. There must be at least 100 Mr. Sacco signs. Sure enough, Mr. Sacco Mania was running wild. Not only were there signs hailing the new cotton hero, but when I got ready to square off with Mark Henry, a loud Sacco, Sacco chant echoed in the arena. Henry, this was before he was known as Sexual Chocolate, began working on my left ankle as the Sacco chant grew louder. Out of nowhere, I dazed the world's strongest man and started to untie my shoe to reduce the swelling, as the announcer speculated. But no, it was not medical attention, but my trusty sidekick that I was seeing. As Henry stumbled to his feet, I put the filthy sock on my right hand. Mr. Sacco seemed almost to be smiling. As Henry turned around and I jammed the offensive athletic apparel into his mouth. Ding, ding, ding! We had a winner. It was the birth of the Sacco Claw, but more importantly, the birth of a star. Mr. effing Sacco. September and October were great months for me. I had gotten past my creative slump, and my fears of wrestling passing me by no longer seemed valid. I had been in a three-way cage match with Shamrock and The Rock in September, and had followed it up with a pretty good October pay-per-view with Shamrock. I was personally proud of it because it involved more wrestling and working on an individual body part than I had done in a long time. I had also continued to wreak havoc on Mr. McMahon's mind with my carrying ways, including a storyline where I kept Vince company while a heavily armed and recently unemployed Austin stalked him. Why don't you just rehire him? I asked my wheelchair-bound boss. The fans love him. He's got a lot of fire and pizzazz, and he makes for some exciting television. Vince would not be deterred. You don't understand, Mick. It's not that simple. This is about principle. Vince, I'll be honest with you, I addressed the boss. I really admire your moral fortitude. Come on, let's play more games. The show broke for a commercial, and when it came back, the fans were treated to an opening shot of my big ass filling their television screen. As the camera panned back, I was revealed to be engaged in a game of solitary twister, which, despite my encouragement, I couldn't get Vince to join in on. Finally, I succumbed to the intensity of the game and toppled over onto the curmudgeonly Vince. Get out, damn it! Get out! He bellowed, even though my ouster would eliminate his only line of defense from Austin. Hey man, stop being a party pooper, I snarled in typical tough guy rhetoric. Most of all, as October came to a close, I had Mr. Sacco. With him, a bad match was good, and a good match was great. I had taken to tucking him inside my tights and making an elaborate ritual of pantomime before actually pulling him out. In some ways, pulling the floppy cotton sock out of my tights was not all that new. To tell the truth, I had been pulling a limp white object out of my chants for years. I'd just never gotten cheered for it. November 1st was a historic night in Houston, and not just because we were in the same building that Ahmed Johnson had refused to put Kurrigan over in. No, this was the building in which my kindness and understanding finally won Vince over. Vince had just gone through an on-air falling out with his son Shane and was no doubt feeling a little melancholy about life. Maybe he was thinking about the hospital or Twister, or maybe he was just sensitive, but whatever the case, he summoned me into his office. In the office, he bestowed upon me a sacred gift, which in actuality was a broken, glued together old belt. Mick, this is yours, he smiled. You've earned it. This is the new Hardcore Championship belt. I was overcome with emotion. I'll be honest with you, Vince, I tearfully said. I love it. Vince looked at me, and it was obvious that he had something on his mind. You know, Mick, he began with about as much sincerity as the Grinch addressing Cindy Lou who was no more than 2. I lost a son tonight, but in some ways, I think I've gained one too. Vince smiled at me as the Stooges wheeled him away. Just as he was about to exit the room, I responded to his touching claim with an equally touching, Gee, thanks. Dad. At the sound of Dad, Vince's face literally looked as if he'd just swigged down a glass of sour milk. I even got the Adam's apple to Bob as if he were actually having trouble swallowing what I just told him. The next night, I was officially welcomed upon my entrance by Vince's Stooges and became Vince's boy. The Survivor Series was coming up at the end of November, and all indicators pointed to the possibility that Vince was handpicking me to be his corporate champion and tear right through the Survivor Championship tournament. First, however, I had to look the part. Borrowing more than slightly from Hardcore Christmas, Cactus and the Kiss Ass Dude, I was given a complete makeover. My hair was shortened by 7 inches. I was completely shaved. I still wore the mask. I was given a manicure and pedicure, and I began wrestling in a tuxedo. In that very tuxedo, I engaged Ken Shamrock in an excellent battle for my Hardcore Championship belt. The belt actually went on to become a coveted possession to the point that I believe it means more than any strap in the company save the big one, the World Wrestling Federation Championship. Our match spilled up onto the ramp where Dad was watching with the Stooges and the corporate bodyguard, the Big Boss Man. Behind my back, the Boss Man helped me gain the win, and I was elated to learn of my victory when Patterson and Briscoe handed me the belt. I looked for Vince and had ad-libbed a big hug. When I got back to the dressing room, Al Snow informed me, You should have seen Vince's face when you hugged him. It was hilarious. Sure enough, when I saw the tape of it, I had to laugh. Vince was great. Within 3 seconds of the hug, Vince's face had run a gamut of emotions from disgust to acceptance to fake happiness to indifference. Although he was supposed to be like a father to him, Dad didn't seem to care for mankind all that much. Heading into the Survivor Series, the fish were smelling just a little bit in Denmark. To win the title, I would have to wrestle and win 4 matches. Despite promising myself that I would come into this tournament in top shape, I was uneasy about my conditioning for such a big pay-per-view. My first round opponent was a mystery opponent that many in attendance thought would be Shawn Michaels. Shawn had retired from active competition 8 months earlier and had only sparingly been heard from since. I was brought out to the ring first, and while inside the squared circle, I heard Vince read off an incredible introduction before announcing the man, the myth, Dwayne Gill. Out came Gill, who would later have a small but fun run as Gillberg. Gill acted overjoyed at just seeing his visage on the overhead screen as he lost match after match to former Federation stars and was startled by his own pyro. The match was over in 20 seconds, and I prepared for my next matchup. Obviously, Vince was going to make everything as simple as possible for his corporate champ. Al Snow was next, and he did the JOB on the PPV. Vince had masterminded a plot that included stealing Mr. Sacco and placing him around Al Snow's head. Now, usually I'm a big fan of the Federation storylines, but this one was a little weak. For one thing, Mr. Sacco was actually several different Saccos, as I usually threw my Sacco to the crowd after a match. Apparently, this sock was special, as I mourned its loss. For his part, Al looked like a complete moron for parading around with a Mr. Sacco headband stapled to his head. When I saw the missing Sacco, I went ballistic, and as usual, Al played winger to my Hulka as I scored the victory. My semifinal opponent was Stone Cold, and we picked up right where we left off and tore the Kiel Center in St. Louis apart. A referee went down, and as Austin hit me with a stunner, babyface referee Shane McMahon slid in to make the count. 1, 2, and nothing. Steve looked at Shane, and the younger McMahon flipped him off, revealing himself to be a no-good SOB just like his dad. At this point, I was waiting for the big boss man to make his presence felt, but he was nowhere to be found. He reminded me of the reindeer in the story my mom used to read me, who fell asleep in a snowbank and missed out on the happiest Christmas of all. Trust me, though, there was nothing happy about the finish of this match, even if I did emerge the victor. My means of victory was so weak that it never aired in any form on World Wrestling Federation programming. Actually, compared to this, my Lost in Cleveland vignettes didn't look too bad. The final match of the tournament, with the Federation title hanging in the balance, pitted me against The Rock. By virtue of his charisma, good looks, endless stream of catchphrases, and 2 big moves, The Rock was riding a huge wave of momentum and popularity into the finals. One of the 2 moves, the People's Elbow, was the most ludicrous thing I'd ever seen in any form of entertainment, but its effect on a crowd was phenomenal. Momentum and popularity aside, I had to be considered the heavy favorite going in due to my close relationship with Dad. I had only one problem. I really had no clue what I was going to do in this huge main event. I was physically exhausted and mentally drained. For a wrestler with only 2 years' experience, The Rock had incredible poise in the ring, but he work looked worn and confused. We looked up and drew a blank, another lockup, and another blank. I was worried as hell. Within a minute, I had The Rock on the mat with a rear chin lock, a sure sign that the match was sailing down the tubes. Our match was literally dying, and as the senior member in the ring, I would be held to blame. Somehow we turned it around. The momentum began to grow, and we turned up the volume to the point that it was a very good match. The Rock was making a comeback and had things going his way until I caught him charging at me and backdropped him over the ropes. As The Rock struggled to his feet, I climbed to the second turnbuckle outside the ring as I had done many times before. This time, however, there was nobody home, and I crashed hard into the Spanish announcer team table with my right knee absorbing the impact. Because I had hit the edge, the table didn't break like it normally did. Instead, it put up a hell of a fight before crumpling to the ground. I lay on the ground and tried to will myself back into the ring. The pain was intense as I had dislocated my kneecap and torn my medial meniscus. The injury would eventually put me on an operating table 6 months later. Regardless of the pain, I had a match to finish. I rolled into the ring and saw The Rock waiting for a big clothesline. I ducked it and instead delivered my double arm DDT. I went for the cover. 1, 2, and oh, The Rock just kicked out, but it was real close. I lifted up my button-down shirt that I'd bought at Kmart for $12.50 but would later sell for $200. The fans knew what was coming next, and despite the fact that they disliked Vince's new stooge, let out a mighty roar. The Rock turned around and I clamped on the hold. He struggled mightily but managed to counter with his second big move, the Rock Bottom. The Rock was groggy but placed an arm over my chest. The referee dove down. 1, 2, and I just kicked out, about as close as a count could get. The Rock stood up. He glared at the St. Louis crowd and the place just erupted. The Rock threw off the elbow pad, signaled for the move, and then went about completing the single worst move ever created in sports entertainment. Boom! People's elbow. The place exploded. This had to be it. 1, 2. I just barely kicked out, and a big ooh echoed throughout the arena. It was about time for things to get screwy. The Rock looked at Vince and gave him the people's eyebrow, the same facial gesture that Lee Majors had used so well throughout his career. Vince nodded and shot his version of the arched brow back. The Rock then calmly stepped between my legs and crossed them with my right foot hooked over between his biceps and armpit. He turned me over and Vince frantically called for the bell. I had not been in the sharpshooter for more than 2 seconds, and the match was over. Vince hugged The Rock and proclaimed him the new corporate champion. In a complete reworking of Bret Hart's Survivor Series screwjob ending, I had now been screwed. Somehow, Vince had managed to take last year's real-life situation and turn it into the most creative finish of the year. Immediately, The Rock became the most hated man in the company, and my popularity took off. I was entering into the territory that only Austin had previously had access to. I was about to get my hands on the McMahons. Over the course of the next several weeks, I wreaked havoc on Vince, Shane, and the corporate stooges. I beat up Vince in a parking lot and destroyed Patterson and Briscoe in a boiler room. I had the honor of giving Shane a beating in his first professional match, which was very good for what it was. With Shane in trouble, the Stooges ran in for the save, but I was able to cut them off and caught Briscoe with the Socko claw. Patterson came running as well, and I had a claw waiting for him, too. No, it was not a mandible claw, but instead the dreaded ball claw that I had once had against me in the famous backyard match at Danny Zucker's house. My parents were visiting for the holidays, and my dad thought the claw and Patterson's subsequent selling of it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. "Play that back again," he howled, and as a result, we got to see poor Pat tap dancing in terror as I traumatized his 2 testes half a dozen times. "Show it again, Dad. Show it again," my kids kept saying as we laughed as a family at the genital goings-on. It was a perfect example of wrestling bringing a family together. The next morning, I was awakened by the sounds of my children laughing. They were watching that same tape over and over again. I thought so much of it that I even addressed it the following Monday in Albany, New York. "Last week was a big week for me," I informed the raucous Raw contingent. "It was the first time that I ever touched another man's testicles, and I've got to admit that, in a rugged, manly type of way, I kind of enjoyed it." Fortunately, footage of the previous week's scrotal assault was aired while I was speaking in order to clue fans in on what the hell I was talking about. Otherwise, they might have thought I was referring to a secret camping trip or something. The stage was set for Worcester, Massachusetts the next evening. We'd been defeating WCW in impressive fashion, but they had been promoting a huge title match for their Georgia Dome Nitro, which Raw would be competing with. We decided to give them a title match of our own. The Royal Rumble was set to be our next pay-per-view at the end of January. Triple H and I were set to wrestle in a Rumble qualifying match with Shane McMahon as the special guest referee. The match was forgettable, except for Shane's ridiculously fast count that spelled defeat for Mankind. Helmsley said that he hated to win like that, but with a spot in the Rumble at stake, he'd take a win any way he could get it. "Here's a late Christmas present, Mick," he muttered as he booted the Junior McMahon and proceeded to pedigree him into the mat. Now I had a tremendous task in front of me. I needed to put a painful submission hold on Shane, but it needed to be visually exciting. A chokehold or front face lock wouldn't do. To add pressure to the situation, I also needed to perform this painful hold while tucking into a microphone, so I needed one hand free. In a flash, I remembered my amateur career and my propensity for leg wrestling that was unusual for a big man. I remembered the hold that used to make my friend Alan Bloomberg cry and even made future King of Queens star Kevin James suffer in the hot basement wrestling room at Ward Melville High. Yes, he really was on the team with me. Seconds later, I had Shane hooked in a pretty impressive guillotine body ride, which is more or less a lying abdominal stretch. This is a move that Jim McGonigal taught me at Ward Melville, I sneered over the mic while Shane whimpered beneath me. It turned out that Coach McGonigal, who had beaten leukemia when I was in grade school and had coached both me and my brother in high school, became more well known from that one comment than he had from 20 years of diligent coaching. With Shane at my mercy, I called out, "Vince, I want a title shot and I want it tonight," while Shane moaned in displeasure, "Give it to me, or I'll break his goddamn shoulder." I then put the mic to Shane's face so that he could say a few words. "Ow, ow, ow," was all he could manage. With his own flesh and blood in peril, Vince almost immediately gave The Rock up and agreed to the big showdown. The Rock was displeased, but the crowd was not, as they prepped for an epic battle. I almost didn't make the epic. I decided to take off through the people as I'd seen so many other wrestlers do before. I almost didn't get out in one piece. I had neglected to tell security of my grand exit scheme, and as a result, there was no one to block the fans from reaching out and touching me, and slapping me, and tearing off my clothes. For anyone who wondered why I showed up for the battle with a shredded garment, now you know. What scared me is that these people liked me, and they nearly killed me. If they hadn't, I might have had to no-show my date with Destiny. I got back to the dressing room with almost no time to prepare. I knew Vince's corporation and DX, who had kind of taken me in as their little buddy, would be surrounding the ring. I wanted to make sure they didn't fight until the time was right. I had seen way too many similar situations end up in disaster because of overzealous ringside onlookers, and I wanted to make sure that momentous occasion didn't suffer a similar fate. I barely had even a chance to wish The Rock luck when his music played. Although the situations were completely different, I felt like I had before my King of the Ring deathmatch finale in Japan. I just wanted to get through it. Fortunately, we did much more than that. We had engaged in better bouts before, and we would engage in better in the future, but this night was special. Too many wrestlers think the secret of a great match is to line up as many great moves as possible and run them off from A to Z. That may be great for them, but it takes out the factors that make the match turn into magic: emotion and spontaneity. Our title match may have been lacking in choreography, but it was filled with emotion and spontaneity, and as a result, felt magical as it unfolded. I was rock bottomed on a table, which was a first, and as a result was on the defensive as The Rock began kicking my Rudy Poo candy ass all over the Worcester Centrum. Time and again, the Great One fired away, but I waited for a mistake, and with my white shirt in tatters mounted a small offensive. I stunned The Rock with a suplex and then slowly got to my feet. As the corporate champion gained his bearings, I took off for the ropes, but was unable to spring off due to the big boss man's interference. I pulled Boss Man up to the ring apron and fired a punch, which set off a chain reaction of Corporation and DX fisticuffs. With the referee's attention on the ringside melee, young Shane, who was still nursing his sore shoulders, slid the championship belt onto The Rock. I turned around and wham! The Rock caught me on the head with a shot so hard that you could hear the heavy belt dong off my skull. The referee turned around to see the Great One going for the cover. In the closest of counts, I kicked out on 2 and 27/28 for a huge ooh from the frantic fans. The Rock was irate, but he readied himself quickly for a second belt shot that would surely allow him to walk out of Worcester still wearing 10 pounds of gold. He swung mightily, but just like Casey of Mudville fame, struck out, and I was there to benefit from his mistake. One boot to the stomach and a double-arm DDT later, and both of us were lying on the ground in a weakened state. The DX Corporation battle was really picking up outside, and the referee headed out to restore order. Amazingly, none of the combatants heard the gigantic sound of glass breaking or the thunderous ovation that came with it as Stone Cold made his way to the ring brandishing a steel chair. Austin had not been heard from since a December 13th injury, and the absence had only made the fans' hearts grow fonder. As The Rock was recovering, Stone Cold slid into the ring and caught the rising champion with a nice chair shot to the top of the people's skull. Clong! The champ wasn't rising anymore. The referee looked up to see me just barely covering The Rock and slid in to make the count that would list my name forever in the annals of sports entertainment history. 1, 2, 3. The bell rang, and it was one of the sweetest sounds I'd ever heard. For years, I had never believed this could happen. I had been respected by my peers and even idolized by certain fans, as witnessed by the Foley is God signs that were gracing the Centrum in Worcester. I had shed blood on 5 different continents and had taken part in what were arguably some of the finest matches ever seen. Still, I had wrestled for 15 years with the knowledge that I didn't look like a star, let alone a champion. I learned to accept and even love my role as the lovable loser who somehow never wins the big one. And I can honestly say that before that day of December 29th, 1998, I never believed that it would happen. But it had happened, and the reaction was heartwarming. The Worcester fans were on their feet, and I was on the shoulders of D-Generation X as they paraded me around the ring. Several pictures later showed the members of DX smiling broadly, and I know that the smiles were too bright to not be real. Much like the early dude, Mankind, or more accurately, Mick Foley, had made the people feel good about themselves. A chant of Foley, Foley began, but unlike my traumatic night at King of the Ring, these chants were loud and growing louder. I was let down from the shoulders of the DX and grabbed the house mic. I first addressed Vince, who was yelling and fussing his way off stage, although secretly I suspect he was beaming. I then got down on my knees and spoke from the heart. At the risk of not sounding cool, I began, I want to dedicate this belt to my two little people at home, Dewey and Noel. Daddy-O did it!